Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. I know this can always be a little unpredictable when exactly I start speaking. I apologize for that. That's OBS usually cutting me off or cutting me out, depending on if we're talking about the beginning of the video or the end. That being said, it seems like I'm live now. I can see my stream on my iPad concurrently. That's really good. Quality seems to be alright. As always, please let me know if the audio quality is alright, given the nature of the reaction videos we do. OBS sometimes has a tendency to screw up my media that I'm reacting to. I actually have quite a little bit prepared. I really do want to talk about the OnePlus Open, a foldable that I think could actually be interesting to a wider number of people than previous foldables, and I will elaborate on why I believe that is. I apologize for my raspy voice, or however you want to describe it. It's I'm still in the midst of a bad cold, but it seems to have gotten a little better, so I hope that you can at least understand me, and given my voice is always pretty deep, so I hope it doesn't sound completely unrecognizable. Beyond that, I would also like to talk about the fact that we didn't get any new iPads or Macs this week, and what it could mean for the timeline until the end of the year, or what it would mean for 2024. Because potentially imagine how big 2024 just will be in terms of Apple releases if we don't end up getting anything new this year anymore. Beyond that, there's some more details specifically on what we might expect from 2024 specifically, or just a more broader array of like Apple further releases coming up, be it a 12.9-inch iPad Air, or how we might get a non-mini LED iPad Pro, though I will have very negative things to say about that kind of rumor. And at the very end, depending on if my voice is still there, I would like to talk about my first impressions of Spider-Man 2 on PS5. If I don't end up having the energy, I might end up doing it as a separate video, maybe tomorrow or something like that. I have like SkillUp's review pre-downloaded, so I can react to it and give my impressions during it. You know, guys, that's how I like doing my stuff. Beyond that, I know that I'm probably going to be alone during this live stream. It's a very weird time to be streaming, but this is when I have the energy, and given that I'm sick, I'm going to use that. So I do want to say a big thank you to the channel hitting over 8,000 subscribers, 8.2 thousand subscribers right now. Amazing. Our last couple of videos have done incredibly well. I guess there's been a lot of excitement about potential iPad releases for this week, or it's still this week, it's not the last week. And then we got the Apple Pencil, which is actually a new piece of hardware that I covered. So there's a lot of stuff that people definitely were excited about. Some stuff did pan out, like the Apple Pencil. Some other stuff definitely did not. So I still want to say a big thank you to anybody who like watched all that content. We have more likes, I believe, for my videos this week than we've had like for the last 2 months combined or something like that. So the actual engagement on the videos in terms of like liking and viewed hours is pretty insane. Thank you guys so much for that. Beyond that, there's not that much to talk about. You can see my little Bella here in the background. She is joining us as per usual. I'm just incredibly grateful. Hopefully we can get to 10,000 subscribers in a due time. I don't know how much I will be able to stream, so I am not forcing it in any way, but hopefully until the end of the year, but maybe a little earlier than that, depending on obviously how much time I have to stream and how much time you guys have to watch. So without further ado, let's get started right with the MKBHD video. my mouse didn't want to work. Okay.
Talk about these folding phones for a minute because it's changed a lot since the last time we did. So the first ever folding phone from OnePlus came out this week. It's called the OnePlus Open. Not a very good name, but a very, very, very good.
I don't know. I like it a little bit. Like, I know it's not a great name by any means, but it's like I think what I dislike about like marketing names like Fold or Flip, or in this case Open, it's just, it sounds ridiculous to say like Flip 2, Fold 2, Open 2 and stuff like that. So it's not necessarily like it's a bad name overall. I just think once we start talking about like subsequent generations, it will become more of an issue that it's just such a broad term. But I like it. It's right? It's OnePlus and Open. At least there's some kind of alliteration, something like that. Maybe that works for it. And genuinely, I do like this device quite a bit. So my perception of its name doesn't really cover like doesn't really destroy anything else about it, right? If the name was bad for an already bad product, that would be something else, right?
First gen foldable. I've been using it for about 3 weeks now. I got lots of good things to say about it, but it's actually, I feel like it's so good that it's actually resurfaced the old question in my head from a couple years ago, which is, what's it going to take for regular people to actually start buying folding phones? Because
okay, the audio is good. I just wanted to say, because it felt like his lips were like maybe a quarter of a second off or something like that. I was scrolling through the video prior, so I thought maybe OBS had broken it again. Let's continue. There isn't that much I can say right now.
Yeah, I like this phone, and I'm going to go ahead and guess that some other reviewers will like this phone too. And some enthusiasts will like this phone.
He's correct about that.
And this video may even get a lot of views, but none of that necessarily translates into regular people just like strolling into a store or going online and choosing to buy one of these. So first things first, the details of this phone. So this is a super high-end phone in every way, and the design is particularly well considered. You can see it's basically the same size as a normal phone on the outside. This is a 6.3-inch 20:9 cover display. Just over 1080p. It's LT.
Yeah, I like this form factor. This is partially why I wanted to react to this device, because I actually think it's very pretty. I think it's very well made. I think it still has some obvious foldable drawbacks, but in my opinion, they're actually really, really well covered up almost, and really well integrated into what are the positives of the folding experience, right? My argument always against foldables has been that there's so much about them that I just don't think honestly gives them a lot of a leg up in terms of like productivity and stuff like that over like a mini tablet, which is pretty easy to carry around with, because foldables by themselves often, like in skinny jeans, they don't fit well and stuff like that. They're not as comfortable to hold as a regular phone. Their front-facing screen is usually like a pretty narrow aspect ratio, making it really uncomfortable, so you end up having to unfold them, which doesn't give them even the versatility of a regular smartphone, because now you have to use it in two hands, while even with a Pro Max iPhone, you can still at least try making it work one-handed. And then, of course, versus a mini tablet, except for Samsung, there's been like the historic questions, well, what do you do if you need like a pencil-like support and stuff like that, stylus support basically, versus regular smartphones. There's the question like, how does it compare in terms of battery life, camera performance, sustained performance from a high-end chip, all that stuff. And in my opinion, the benefits of the previous foldables have absolutely not been worth the sacrifices. I'm not even talking about durability issues, the big creases that we have seen on displays, sometimes stuff like even like inconsistent display signs in the front and back, between like 60 hertz and 120 hertz, between like even like non-LTPO and LTPS and LTPO panels, not perfectly matched like color stuff between them. All of that which would be absolute deal breakers for me at $1,800. But this phone seems to be getting a lot of stuff right, and I really wanted to give it its due, really wanted to give it some fair coverage. Granted, of course, MKBHD, Mr. Who's the Boss, are infinitely more influential than I am, and I am having to piggyback on their stuff because obviously nobody is going to send me a OnePlus Open, but I do still believe it's quite an interesting thing to experience together.
PO down to 10 hertz, and it's an absurdly bright 2,800 nits max brightness between these pretty.
Yeah, those brightness levels, absolutely don't understand them. Like, I understand it's probably about like a 1% of the screen can go this bright. It's a completely worthless metric. They themselves say it's 1400 max brightness, but 2800 peak brightness. And GSM Arena, the one site that I really trust when it comes to display brightness test, is showing that it's actually hitting those 1400 nits in scenarios where the iPhones, both the entire 15 series and the 14 Pro, hit around 17 to 1800 as advertised. Well, granted, it's advertised as 2000, but it's never quite a full match in that regard. Apple can sometimes advertise it on an ever so slightly smaller area than how GSM Arena tested and stuff like that, but yeah, so no, nothing yet comes close to the actual real-life display brightness of the iPhone. I will be interested to see if the actual Pixel 8 and Pixel 8 Pro with their actual and super actual displays actually have like super high brightness that is actually verifiable in like scientific testing. I'm getting sick of this, like, oh, you know, this OLED LTPO screen can go up to like 5,000 nits on like 0.1% of the screen, and so we're gonna advertise that. That doesn't fly with me, I'm sorry.
Thin bezels. So this actually does take the crown now for the brightest display I have ever seen.
No, it doesn't. That's still the iPhone MKBHD. I'm sorry, but beyond that, I'm not complaining about 1400 nits of max brightness. I do want to say peak brightness, but that's not how OnePlus advertises peak brightness. So yeah, it is what it is. It's not a bad screen by any metrics. I think it's probably like an LTPO, either 1.0 or like an early 2.0 panel in the front. That's why it only goes down to 10 hertz, and then it's probably all the way up to LTPO 3.0 on the inner display. That's how it goes from 1 hertz to 120, which on Android, even on LTPO 2.0 panels, given that the display controllers are not up to par with what Apple does, rarely have there been panels that actually go down to 1 hertz, even though the technology is capable of it.
The co-crown for best foldable to use while closed alongside the Pixel Fold. So I still think the Pixel Fold it's more reachable, it has better...
Yeah, but look at this, right? You cannot see my cursor, I always have to point that out. So you know what I'm pointing out, by the way, without even seeing my cursor right now or without me explaining. It's that freaking left dark bezel here that flows into... the hinge, and then you have the massive top and bottom bezels once you unfold it, so you cannot just get rid of bezels on the Pixel no matter what you do. Now the OnePlus looks just a tad asymmetrical, but in between those asymmetric stuff, right, because obviously in the left the hinge has to be somewhat rectangular, it looks actually like a gorgeous, like slightly curved edges phone. It looks amazing. It looks clean as fuck. I really like it. Thank you to anybody joining. I see the live chat's becoming a little more active, but yeah, it's like, no, that's not how you do it, Pixel. And this is why I really wanted to cover this, because look, I know it's not OnePlus's technically, I know it's OnePlus's technically first foldable. We'll get to Oppo. I know they can obviously like copy paste a lot from Oppo in that regard, but nobody was forbidding Google from joining the the foldable game a little earlier. Nobody forced Google to implement like the ugliest fucking hinge and the largest bezels currently. Nobody forced Google to put a freaking Tensor G2 at a time when their Tensor G3 was right around the corner. And even the Tensor G3 isn't that great, but at least it's a new chip based on a somewhat modern Samsung Note. So yeah, there is so much done right about the OnePlus Open versus the Pixel Fold. It's absolutely mind-boggling.
Button placement, since it's a bit shorter, but there's no question this feels like a flagship phone on the outside, even if you never even open the thing. There's also a bunch of design touches I really like. The flat sides all the way around, super clean. The alert slider is also back, so it's way up there at the top of the phone, which is kind of tough to reach, but I love that it works exactly as you'd expect, same as previous OnePlus phones that had it.
Yeah, I like that ringer switch. It's not the action button, unfortunately, which is awesome, but it is what it is. It's a good OnePlus innovation or feature implementation, how else you want to see it, and I like that they have gone back to something that a lot of people liked about OnePlus devices, and they double down on it in a pretty premium device, in a device where actually in internal space is at a real premium. They still decided to implement it, so they get my respect for it. Guys, whoever is watching, please as always let me know if the audio is doing all right for you, and you're of course free to participate in the live chat. I really love your input. If you think you have something to disagree with, or you really want to agree on something, I really encourage you joining.
And the power button also doubles as a fingerprint reader, which we've seen with lots of these folds as well. It's awesome. And then around the back, mixed bag, I would say. I'm not the biggest fake leather on the back of a phone.
I like it. I wouldn't personally want a smartphone that way, but I do like that it's legitimately an alternative to just glass, and obviously the metal and glass sandwiches that we currently have. I have always said my favorite design in pretty much anything is just an aluminum or a metal unibody enclosure. I think it's the best for heating and stuff like that. Yes, I understand plastic will have like better radio frequency transparency. It will have like transparency for wireless charging, and glass is sort of a medium step in between that, where it will allow for wireless charging, but it's not the greatest either for radio frequency transparency. So that's how we ended up where we are, because we did want something more premium than plastic, but something less compromised than a full unibody. If we are getting glass and metal sandwiches, I do like them being somewhat clean, but I do like also like some flourishes, like vegan leather on the back or something like that. I don't think that's bad. I think if the material is premium enough, I think if it's designed to last long, then it's fine, basically.
One person, it gives me like Samsung 2016 vibe.
No, the Samsung 2016 was garbage, or was it? Yeah, I don't remember which model that even exactly was. I remember back in the day I really tested out every Samsung I could. Like we have like the IFA, the Internationale Funkausstellung in Berlin, so I always went there, always tried out all the latest devices. It's fascinating to me, like just how absurd certain Samsung designs were in that regard, like in terms of the material used or even the shape that they tried to do. This is not that. What OnePlus is currently doing is way more premium, way more thought out. So I don't think that just because they're both doing something in that vein makes those things equivalent in any way.
But at least it does hide fingerprints. This is the other color now. It's a green. It looks a little bit cleaner.
Yeah, I'm not a green fan, but at least it's a very dark green.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy looking, but it also happens to be exactly where my index finger rests on the back of the phone. So it's like a nice little shelf that feels really natural when using the...
That's how I feel with iPhone Pros. Not so much with the Pro Max because it's larger, the camera sits a little further up. But on the 6.1-inch models, that's always my feeling that, yeah, sure, the triangular beast is like the tri-eyes beast, I guess. It's not triangular, it's more for squircle. And I can rest my finger next to it. I absolutely agree here. I don't think it looks pretty good. I don't think it needed to be this large. But it reminds me of like the old Huawei ways where they tried to do like basically a circle with a camera in every corner and one in the center and stuff like that. I don't think it's a particularly inviting look. But I don't think it really matters in the end. As long as it gives me actually good cameras, I'm pretty willing to accept a lot of bad stuff in that regard.
The phone while closed, so I kind of really like it for that. Also, the LED flash, I guess it couldn't fit, so they shoved it up in the corner for some reason.
I like it.
Then you open this thing up, and it becomes so obvious why they waited so long to do their first foldable. It looks nothing like some of the other first-gen folding screens.
Yeah, no, it does not look like a first-gen Z Fold or like the Pixel currently does. It obviously looks a lot similar to how the Fold 5 looks these days, but it obviously does not go for like an under-display camera or something like that. It obviously has like a much nicer outer screen that is like much more usable, and in that way it's superior. But yeah, the overall form factor is incredibly similar.
From years ago. It's got this huge 7.8-inch corner-to-corner LTPO 3.0 display.
Yeah, okay.
And again,
I guess maybe I remembered that subconsciously because I watched part of the review yesterday.
Up to 2,800 nits and down to 1 hertz. Even bezels all the way around. Got the hole punch in the top corner. And honestly, one of the least visible creases you will see in a folding phone in 2023. Now, I think it's actually debatable if we can technically call this their first foldable.
We cannot. I don't give a fuck. OnePlus and Oppo are the absolute same company. I know that there is like some management divisions between them. The R&D is pretty much absolutely the same and interchangeable. It has more to do with like focusing more on like the Chinese market for Oppo versus trying to have a wider West focused appeal with OnePlus. It has more to do with OnePlus being like the flagship killer company in the West to a degree. Then they completely gave up on that, unfortunately. So it's pretty much only branding that makes them survive as OnePlus. Honestly, it kind of feels like Oppo is the far bigger brand these days worldwide. Maybe because just how influential obviously China is by itself, and in Europe we get a lot of Oppos and stuff like that, defined end devices and stuff like that. So yeah, I think the only reason why we still have a OnePlus is because we used to have OnePlus. It's for the same reason why we still have like Nokia branding. Obviously Nokia definitely does not exist in the way OnePlus still does, right? It's still the same company doing it, while Nokia has been like sold and bought several times in the meantime. But the reason why the branding is kept is pretty similar.
Phone, because while OnePlus hasn't made a foldable yet, their sister company Oppo clearly has. So I wouldn't be surprised if this took a lot of tech from them. Actually, there is another just released Oppo phone called the Oppo Find N3, and it's the same as this. But the point still stands. With this screen on, you literally don't see the crease at all. And screen off, you still kind of have to look for it. And then, yeah, you hit the angle where the light reflects off of the middle of the phone.
Yeah, so this is why I really wanted to cover this phone. It's because I hate how people cover creases where they will say, oh, they become unnoticeable and shit like that. I have used foldables for a while. I have never felt that at all, where the crease didn't bother me. I also didn't like the plastic feeling of the screens in like the original days. Look, I know it's like ultra thin glass or whatever. It does not feel like regular glass. Also, I don't like to baby my devices, so like even having to make sure that like look, I can be a little bit of a dirtbag, like I can chew on my fingernails. Imagine then my fingernails digging into that plastic cover and shit like that. No, 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 that's not what I'm about. So yeah, this, at least it seems to be mostly solving the screen crease problem. So I really wanted to give them some respect for that. Look, I know that Oppo has been working on that for a while, but it seems like this is actually still a little better. It also seems to come with like a noticeably much improved hinge. Like, I recommend you guys watch the Mr. Mobile video. Where he covers how they test it and stuff like that. Obviously, all hinges and devices are tested for like waterproofing and shit like that, but it seems to be like they've really reduced the number of parts in the hinge. They're really focused on making it snappy and basically conform to any kind of shape you want it to take. So yeah, it's a nice evolution, and I do believe that it's now pretty much good enough for a lot more people to consider it. I will have some points whether I believe that people should be running out to get this specific device, but I do believe that we are now one generation further. Actually, right? I think we've been recently getting some generations where like between the Z2 to Z4, like I would be still very much worried about like durability and stuff like that. And then finally the Z Fold 5 promises better durability. This promises better durability. And then the Pixel Fold is a piece of garbage.
And then you can see it. But this is one of those phones that looks really good from almost every angle you would actually use it. And then it also has one of those hinges that stays at whatever angle that you hold it at. So if you want a sort of a 90-degree angle or a little bit more open or closed, you can do that. And then it has a nice, satisfying, spring-loaded clap shut. It's impressively thin. It's not the thinnest one I've ever seen, but
I don't want them to be that thin, to be honest. I like components that take up space, right? I like good speakers. I like decent battery life. I like phones that don't overheat easily. Yeah, I know iPhone overheating jokes, blah blah. iOS 17.03 fixed it, blah blah. I still know there is no vapor chamber or something like that inside the iPhone. But I do like me some big, nice sensors and camera lens arrays. So yeah, absolutely, I'm 100% on board with them making it ever so slightly thicker to make it still nice, durable, and premium by giving it nice components.
pretty good. It's lighter than you would expect. It's actually, if you put it on a scale, it's basically the exact same weight as an iPhone 14 Pro when they were doing stainless steel. So just a regular phone weight. So it's an
This is why Apple had to reduce the weight. I've said it for years. That weight is a little too much. In fact, I just bought like the Pitaka case, the MagSafe Pro, I believe it's called, and I'm sending it back because it's way too heavy and way too unwieldy, because it also makes the edges super hard. I don't know honestly what I'm getting. Maybe will be getting like the MagSafe like non-pro, like no, it's MagZ or something like that. It's weird naming. It's not MagSafe, obviously. I'm sick. So about that, it's like, and it makes the edges like super hard again, whereas obviously the iPhone 15's like slightly rounded off the corners. So I don't know what to say here in that regard. Like Apple definitely did a good job in reducing the weight, and now I have to find something that keeps with that weight, but also keeps with the comfortness of the form factor that they've now established.
impressive piece of hardware, but then the software for this one is OnePlus. So it's Oxygen OS 13.2, and it's got all kinds of little tweaks and little features that power users are going to love, because let's face it, it is a phone for power users. People who are going to love the continuity features between the open screen and the closed screen. So once you're done using a big app, you just close it like this and then swipe up to pick up where you left off on the outside screen if you want to. Just like the Pixel Fold, it's going to mirror your home screen setup automatically between the cover screen and the inside screen. So if you change something like move a folder or a widget or an app on one, and then switch to the other, it will have also moved from there too. Keeps.
I like this default a lot. I've said that before with the Pixel that I think it's the correct approach. Honestly, I think this is how Apple would be handling it if they were making this phone, or foldables in general. I do believe, obviously, in Android, maybe you would want more customization than that. But honestly, I am already more than fine with the customization level I have in like a one-screen iPhone. And I never really, like, I've cluttered up my home screen with a ton of widgets on my iPad. I never really even look at them, so I think honestly I don't need any of that shit. Like, I do want my shortcuts to a degree. I do want like my Siri suggestions for apps, but I don't need that much more than that. And moving like my app icons and my folders to one side and then expect the other side to just be an extension of that is exactly how I want it to behave. So kudos to both Pixel and OnePlus to just making it a nice, smart default experience.
A little bit more organized. I kind of wish I had the option to change that since this is Android and I am a power user, but nevertheless, that's the way it is. But then there's also a ton of multitasking features on the inside screen for having multiple apps open at once. So you can have obviously one app open full screen, and that looks good for a surprising number of apps. It'll stretch them if they're not natively built for this. But then you can have two apps side by side, and then you can pick a third app to get in the mix. Then they're all just sort of next to each other in this triple panel view, and you can move things between them really quickly. Or if you pinch out with 4 fingers, you can see all of the apps at once. So between that and the dock with all of your apps and recent files, it's just a very well-considered hub for sitting down and just getting stuff.
Yeah, I've thought about like reacting to also Mr. Who's the Boss's review, but I actually think MKBHD is doing a pretty good job of summarizing pretty much everything important here. I do like what they've done with multitasking. Do I think this is like the end or be all of all multitasking? Personally, no. I'm not always a fan when stuff is like out of the way, when it doesn't like scale that well in terms of like one app is like literally only half there, and you have to zoom out, and then once you zoom out, then like your tap targets become a little too small, but then again you can zoom back in. So I feel like if apps were really going out of their way to optimize for it, that could be cool. I definitely don't see this happening because this just isn't the multitasking paradigm on either Android by default or iOS or any desktop operating system. But I do think it's a cool idea, and it reminds me of like the old DeX days where like Samsung really tried to do something different. Because remember, the DeX is not always just about like an external screen, keyboard and mouse and stuff like that. DeX was also to a large degree designed so that Android tablets can work more similar to how a Windows laptop would work, right? With all of your fully movable apps and stuff like that on so that you don't have to rely as much on like switching between apps and multitasking gestures and stuff like that. This is what at that time I thought that the DeX was way too slow and really not intuitive in its first few versions, but then it got better, devices got faster, had better battery life by default because the chips were more efficient. They created like accessories for the phones to really make pairing to an external monitor way easier. I would still argue I wouldn't get an Android tablet anyway because it's just Android on tablets just isn't what it should be. But it reminds me of that, right? Where there's actually some thought put into it, some actual problem solving. It's not something that Apple needs to do currently, right? But this is where Stage Manager was born as well for Apple, right? This is where like slide in with like the apps on the original, but the iPad Air was like introduced and stuff like that for were iPads that didn't have like 2 gigs of RAM, like the iPad Air 2, so they couldn't fully multitask. So you had like an app that could slide in from the right. And while that wasn't necessarily like obviously the best thing in terms of multitasking, Apple actually managed it really, really well, where you could have like almost like an extra multitasking tray for your slide-in apps, slide over, I believe it's called. Again, I am sick. Yeah, this is where I think like there's a lot of ingenuity coming from those companies, and because obviously Apple has not yet had to work on a foldable form factor, I'm pretty sure that if they do, they would have a very specific version of Stage Manager specifically for their foldable. But because obviously this is OnePlus's first quote-unquote foldable, this is where they had to get creative, and in my opinion they create a multitasking thing that isn't necessarily what I want to see on every other device, right? But it's definitely something I do like seeing here. It's Diablo. Damn, today's stream started a bit early. Man, I am sick as fuck. So I'll apologize because you either get the stream now or you don't get it at all, right? Because I can already feel my nose running again. You can hear from my voice, but I am so great that you're joining. I'm really like getting up all my power levels here to do the stream for you guys, because I just couldn't fathom like with hitting 8,000 subscribers this week of not doing a stream, right? Because I know there's a lot of like OGs on the channel who like the streams. I know a lot of new subscribers only watch videos afterwards, not the streams. So I really wanted to stream. Sorry if I killed like some of your time planning for today. But I think this is going to be a long video, so you're probably going to get still a lot of stuff out of it. Yeah, I know. By the way, I have adjusted my timing a little bit because I know how many people come from India, and I really like, I believe in the last month, like 60% of my viewers or something like that came from India. So I really wanted to give something back to that community, even if it's something simple as like a better time for you guys to join my streams.
Done. Like I feel like when I sit down and open this phone, I'm about to be really productive and get a lot done. This phone, the OnePlus Open, honestly, as a phone, it nails all 5 of my pillars of a great smartphone. Great screen, great battery, great build, great performance, great camera. And I'm not being generous with that stuff. It like actually nails all of that stuff. Like you already heard about the great screen, and the fact that they match each other so well inside and outside is already pretty great.
Yeah, so some compliments to that. I actually believe MKBHD in that regard. There's no need for me to really fact check it. I've already fact checked like the max versus peak brightness claims. I have like provided like my own 2 cents on like the multitasking that is implemented here. But when he says like, oh, the device is well constructed and the screens are like really like almost like one screen, right? Where you look at it at the front, then you open it up, and then you have like what is essentially the same screen in terms of brightness, peak refresh rate, and stuff like that. I really do like that. It's almost ironic because I feel like it should be the other way around, where I think the outer screen needs 1 hertz more than the inner screen, but I guess they just could source like only so much LTPO 3.0 panels, so they reserved it for the inner one. And it's also like nice high resolution devices, screens, which actually have much higher pixel density than Samsung's panels. I believe it comes out to like around 430 ppi versus Samsung's inner display being at like a 370 or something like that. This is at the top of my head. Again, I am sick, guys. I will say that a lot because I am actually really sick, but I am really, really happy that MKBHD is covering those like particulars, because I often feel like they're getting ignored because like, look, it folds, right? And then it becomes stupid. But here it's actually, you know, it's a premium device. It's over like $1,500. So I should maybe be nitpicky. And if something is actually good in comparison to similar devices, let me point that out.
There's also great performance, super high-end specs. Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, 16 gigs of fast RAM, 512 gigs of UFS 4.0 storage. I mean, the pair of 120 hertz.
Yeah, and by the way, I really do believe that this is worth mentioning that as well, right? It's 16 gigabytes of LPDDR5X memory, right? So that's double the RAM of the iPhone 15 Pro Max that starts at $1,200. So, and it's faster memory, so that's probably at least $100 that you should consider charging extra for. If it were Apple charging more for it, this would be $200. This is how much they charge for 8 gigs of extra RAM on the MacBooks, right? And then Apple charges $200 to go from 256 gigabytes to 512. Now, most Android manufacturers charge a little less for that, but still, right? So you would end up with $1,600 on the iPhone, while this is $1,700, and this is obviously a foldable. In this way, the iPhone will be superior in several ways, right? It will have the A17 Pro, it will have like its titanium build, it will have like Apple's optimization and stuff like that. But there is a lot of value here, which I don't think you get if you get devices like the Fold 4 that are $100 more expensive and come by default with half the storage and 25% less memory. It's Diablo, you're asking, do you think with all Android companies coming out with foldable phones, Apple will come out with a foldable phone by 2025 or earliest the end of 2024? We are actually getting rumors that Apple is working on a foldable tablet, so I assume this would be like either a mini style tablet that folds out into a 13-inch tablet or something like that, or maybe like a 13-inch tablet that folds into like a 17, 18-inch like big screen that you then can use almost like as a laptop. But I think if Apple were actually working on a foldable phone, we would have gotten it sooner. I still don't think the technology is quite Apple ready. I think there's quality control issues here. Like, do you remember or do you think about just how many gates there are, right, with Apple? Like every scratch gate from the iPhone 5 days, to the bent gate on the iPhone 6, to antenna gate on the iPhone 4, to, well, I guess we kind of got overheating gate this year, but just consider getting an iPhone, right, or a foldable iPhone that essentially becomes an iPad mini. Can you imagine how people would react if it suddenly didn't have like the waterproofing of your regular iPhones? If there was like a noticeable problem after a year where maybe the screen protector started wearing off, like there would be like mass class action lawsuits against Apple and stuff like that. I just don't see why Apple would do it. Quite honestly, like I still look at my iPhone 15 Pro Max, I still struggle to think why I would want anything heavier, bigger, right? Because imagine how heavy and stuff like that this would be from Apple. This would probably be a device closer to like 300 grams than it would be to 250 grams. For me, 240 on the 13 Pro was already borderline. With a case, if I hadn't had a Pitaka case that is super light and thin, this would have been really uncomfortable. Can you imagine this with a battery life that actually matches the Pro Max's battery life, because it now has to fuel a much larger screen? Can you imagine what it means potentially if a foldable iPhone has potentially worse cameras than the Pros, right? Because I assume this would be kind of like an iPhone Ultra, and the Pros and the Pro Maxes would still keep existing. Maybe in 3 years or so. I still maintain the fact that I believe the best foldable design are rollables, not foldables. I think a rollable would essentially keep a certain form factor intact, right? And then it would just get larger. So essentially it could be like in the most simplistic way, it could be like an iPhone Pro that expands into a Pro Max, right? Now, you wouldn't expect that to necessarily match the Pro Max in terms of battery life or stuff like that, because, well, you did want something still thin, light, and portable. While if you really want to expand into even larger, right? Let's say you take the Pro Max and you want to make it double the width, right? So, which ironically wouldn't increase the diagonal as much. It's Pythagorean theory. Sorry about that. But I think that would work really well, because people would essentially pick up an iPhone Ultra. It would be like an iPhone 15 Pro Max in most ways, right? And then it expands, and then for that moment, people know, okay, now I have expanded it, so my battery life is now getting worse and stuff like that. But that's because I wanted a bigger screen for that moment. And once you don't want it, you do boom, 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 and it rolls back in. Versus with a foldable, you still always feel that extra stuff around it, right? You need to have an outer screen because obviously you want to see something on the outer screen. While you just pick up your phone, right? You don't always want to fold it out. And once you fold it out, you want as large a panel as possible, but you still have to keep weight somewhat reasonable, right? But once you actually start also loading it up with all those productivity tasks, then the question arises, well, just how much battery life do you need, right? Just how much performance do you potentially need? With Apple considering giving it even more memory than the regular iPhones and stuff like that. It's like a logistical question, and it's an actual do people use and want it question, where I think foldables don't really solve it. I hope that rollables would. And if Apple has a nice idea of how to make a rollable work, I would be very interested in that. But everything currently points to a foldable iPad rather than a foldable smartphone. I think that's probably also comes down to just people don't expect tablets yet to be like waterproof and stuff like that. So while it would be like a regression with the iPhone, it would basically be just a sidestep for the iPad, for an iPad to come from an iPad that doesn't have waterproofing, but then the foldable iPad still doesn't, right? Stuff like that, basically.
TPO displays have a 240 hertz touch sample rate. It's super.
By the way, we now have a few more people watching. I wanted to say a big thank you for that. If you like this channel, if you like this video, please consider liking, subscribing, sharing, doing all the YouTube jazz, as I call it. And if you want to support this channel directly, you can find my Patreon link in the description of this channel. Or if you really want to, you can support this channel directly. Maybe show some appreciation that I'm streaming while sick. You can send either a super chat or a super sticker in the live chat, or once the video is actually available as a VOD, you can send a super thanks afterwards.
Super responsive, and I mean, the whole thing feels very future-proof. And then you also heard about the build quality, which I'll revisit that in a second. But then battery life has also been excellent with this 4,800 milliamp hour battery and 67 watt fast charging.
Yeah, so again, I've talked a lot about battery life in my speculation about like an Apple foldable. 4800 is obviously still larger than the battery capacity of an iPhone 15 Pro Max, so definitely nice. And if you're doing a lot of your usage only on the front-facing screen, then due to the mixed nature of the usage, you actually might end up getting really decent battery life. Obviously, if you're only using the internal screen, that changes the equation a lot, but that's part of the complication of foldables currently, right? You have to know just how people use it, and you have to account for all of those use factors, and all of that contributes to making the phone a little thicker than it maybe needs to be, a little heavier than it maybe needs to be, and a lot more expensive than most people can definitely afford or want to spend on a smartphone.
Although it just skips wireless charging for some reason, which is like the most OnePlus thing ever.
I think it has a lot to do with like the size of the back camera. Maybe I cannot be fully sure about that, but like your standard like Qi charging ring would be like pretty low on that device, and as far as I understand, most people want to put it somewhat like in the center. I don't mind. I think that wireless charging is cool. I obviously use like my Belkin MagSafe charger all the time for my iPhone, for my AirPods. So my mom uses it currently all the time. So I do like it. I do think that MagSafe is definitely better than any other kind of wireless charging. But yeah, I think it's kind of peculiar that it completely omits wireless charging here.
Adds like no cost and no weight and no thickness, but yet they leave it out when all the other competitors have it anyway. All right, fine. But then this huge camera module on the back kind of implies high-end cameras, but you can never really be sure until you test them. And sure enough, this Hasselblad camera setup is pretty decent. It's got this new stacked sensor for the primary sensor, a 3x telephoto, and an ultra-wide. I found it's pretty good most of the time, although it's not very good at freezing motion, which is fine if you take photos of...
Yeah, that's interesting, because like the likes of The Verge have given this phone like a 6 out of 10, which to me is like completely asinine and shows that the review process there has gone completely downhill. But yeah, it seems to be like the images are universally too dark, where like we can sometimes have like this question of like, well, how much do shadows actually need to be like brightened, right? It's like the iPhone's eternal HDR discussion. But in this case, often stuff ends up being dark that isn't even really in shadow, and there is seemingly it's a really big problem with, I don't know if you would call it shutter lag or just the inability to focus on anything even remotely in movement, and that really like feels like something from 2020 rather than 2023 in terms of problems, whereas the overall quality of the images, if you really get like a good like panorama like bright sunlight picture where nothing is moving, then you really get like still somewhat high-end, let's say high-end 2022 maybe 2021 level cameras, which definitely is better than a lot of other foldables which are closer to like 2019 hardware in some ways. But yeah, this is really a little weird. Maybe OnePlus just is not comfortable in using this specific set of hardware on the back. Maybe they just don't know how to really optimize it for the image signal processor on the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. But yeah, it is what it is basically. Definitely not a high-end camera by today's standards. Since I won't be covering it today, I do recommend you go into like Mr. Who's the Boss's review of this, where he like says, oh, it's the best camera on a foldable yet, but by no means, which is OnePlus is saying, is it the best camera on any smartphone.
Objects, but the second it's people or animals and those things start to move, then it can be kind of hard getting a shutter speed fast enough to freeze that stuff. You basically have to switch.
Yeah, color science and skin color definitely isn't like OnePlus's strength. I know like all those companies like work with Leica or Hasselblad and stuff like that. They get like one engineer who like aligns the lenses for them or something like that. It has nothing to do truly with color science management. I know they try to say that. They're saying, oh look, we have like a default Hasselblad or Leica tuned color science mode and stuff like that, but really those modes are like in their cameras are like tuned for significantly larger sensors that are always way better at managing low light, working with shadows and stuff like that. Yeah, it's not the same.
To action mode, which there's a button for, and that works by...
Yeah, it's sad if you need an action button for taking pictures. It's not the same as an action button for videos.
cranking the shutter speed way up.
Also, like, just so much of the the user interface. Like, I know, like, OnePlus is maybe not as bad as the likes of Xiaomi. This is a blurred image, I apologize, but look, like, you swipe down below between your different modes, which, by the way, this is not how most manufacturers have done it before the iPhone had like all those different modes at the bottom. A lot of other manufacturers had like wheels and a grid of modes that you chose from. Like, you have like your switch between your front and the back cameras on the right. You have like your image library or shortcut basically on the left. You have like the switch between the different zoom modes in between, and then on top you have your controls. Like, there's basically zero like innovation left here in UX design, which is so weird coming from a company that just had like a really good idea when it comes to multitasking design. So that's a shame here.
As expected, but then ISO starts to get a little high enough that photos are now a little noisier, a little worse looking. So just, that's unfortunate. And by the way, this isn't one of the 5 pillars, but I also found that the microphone on this phone is actually quite good. They're usually not.
Yeah,
this good.
my compliment for that. Sounds actually really
it all
good.
Comes together in a really nice phone that I think a lot of people, including myself, are going to really like using. So the question is, why do I think people aren't buying folding phones that much if they're this good? Turns out a phone can hit all 5 pillars of a great smartphone and not be a great buy for everyone necessarily. And so it really comes down to 3 things, I think. Number 1 is still price. Number 2 is the durability question, and then number 3 is just the power user problem. So
I have said that before. I guess we'll get to the power user thing, which is, I just think that Apple knows that even their pro users just like the general smartphone experience, and they don't want it to be too compromised. If you end up compromising like your regular like rectangular smartphone experience in order to like accommodate for a front screen, a big internal screen, the fact that you still have to make such a device relatively thin and light, and then you have to design multitasking specifically for that, it's all becoming a lot, and then it asks for like a lot of research and development costs that might not be worth it in the long run. And then if you end up with point 2, as he mentioned, where what if you still have like durability concerns and stuff like that, and if you cannot completely overcome them, well, then you really shouldn't be putting that out, if you're Apple, that is.
Price. This phone is one,
because the first point about the price, that definitely is Apple's least concern. If Apple can manage to sell us, I fully believe that an Apple foldable iPhone, if it had all the specs of a Pro Max iPhone, and at that point I assume the Pro Max would probably start at $12.99, right? Maybe with 512 gigabytes of base storage or something, let's say in 5 years or something, then I'm probably really sure that the iPhone Ultra, a foldable iPhone, would be $2,000. Maybe the packaging would be a little more intricate. Maybe they would ship like a small pencil with it or something like that. But overall, like, I just don't see how it would be like below $1,900 or $2,000. Apple likes their 30 to 40% profit margins. They would want to like recoup some of the research and development costs, which would contain hardware development costs, software development costs. It would also have to account for some of the logistical uncertainty with them not knowing how many of those phones do they have to produce, how much that cannibalizes other iPhone purchases, how much that cannibalizes iPad mini purchases. So yeah, nothing below $2,000 from Apple, especially not if it comes in 2 or 3 years. By that point, inflation and stuff like that, it's just impossible.
$1,700 US. That is a lot of money to spend on a phone, no matter how you chop it up into monthly segments or staggered payments. It's just a lot, right? It's literally twice as much as an iPhone 15.
Well, I have spent more on my 1 terabyte iPhone 15 Pro Max. I really, as I said, this point wouldn't be the concern for Apple when it comes to addressing their customer base.
But guess what? That's literally right in line with its folding competitors. Like the other two folding phones available in the US, Pixel Fold, $1,800. Samsung Z Fold 5, $1,800. So this one's actually kind of a bargain. That's the most obvious thing holding these back, because they're still so expensive. But then number two, durability is also questionable at best. Now, of course, they do all the testing that they can. And guess what? They've got IPX4 water resistance.
Yeah, IPX4 is really not that great by modern standards. Like the first somewhat water resistant iPhone was like the iPhone 7, and that had like IP57 or something like that. Obviously, it's kind of a shame that we're not getting any of that with foldables these days. Like IPX4 really is nothing.
Which is nice. And they have a durability rating for 1 million folds of the hinge. And that's great. But then what about these dead pixels that have started appearing at the bottom middle of my screen right around
what?
the hinge?
Okay. I should have watched the entire video yesterday. I watched the entire Mr. Who's the Boss video, but like, damn, dead pixels in 3 weeks. What did like, is it like a fingernail thing?
3 weeks. And babied it. And this is already starting to show up on mine. It doesn't mean it's going to be bad for everyone, but that's not great. And I suspect...
Yeah, but like, it will get bad for everyone to a degree. Some people for whom it doesn't get that bad, they either get extremely lucky or they don't even use it that extensively with folding in and out, right? Mr. Mobile has to like constantly switch like the protection covers at the front and stuff like that. And obviously he switches between half a dozen phones all the time for review purposes, so no individual phone gets like really like destroyed by him unless he throws it through the room, as he tends to do. But yeah, like dead pixels after 3 weeks, like
it's not gonna happen.
With a regular phone, that would just be an incentive to just send it back and say that it's defective in this way. Like, because obviously if you had something that had punctured the ceramic shield on the iPhone, it would be most likely also like an actual cosmetic issue. But because you have like this ultra thin glass and you have the plastic cover and stuff like that, well, you end up with some things that are going wrong that you cannot really even like diagnose in the same way. You can sometimes apply pressure onto the actual panel without even damaging the front, the actual like protection layers, because those are so thin, because those are so not durable in that way, not protective by any means. Like I don't know, it's just, I would be like, for almost $2,000, that's just not what I want to see. But by the way, when I say almost $2,000, I know it's $1,700. Massive respect for like making one consistent config that actually like works and offers decent value in that regard, with it being like 512 gigabytes, 16 gigs of RAM, no extra bullshit or something like that. I really like that.
On non-folding phones. But the third and final reason folding phones, as great as they've been getting, aren't necessarily translating to mainstream success is that they're power user phones.
I believe that foldables can get to up to 5% of the market. They can take away from other high-end Androids. They can become like secondary pro phones for even people who already have iPhones. I think they can be nice replacements for like mini tablets to a degree. So if you have like an Android user who might have had anything ranging from like one of those 8-inch Android tablets to maybe like an iPad mini, I think that would replace that for some of those people. But overall, I just think the appeal of all that pro stuff just isn't as strong as some reviewers make it out to be. We are now 5 years into the foldable revolution. I just don't think we have ever seen anything so substantial here that people wouldn't just want your regular rectangular iPhone or Android phone and then get a mini tablet or even like something like an iPad Air, which obviously will offer you way more space than this for your productivity stuff, and now also supports stuff like Stage Manager. So yeah, nothing specifically against foldables here. I just think the alternative, while a little less like innovative in a way, makes more sense for more people, especially since foldables still have those other shortcomings, right? Your durability questions, your price questions, where like sure, an iPad mini and an iPhone together probably cost more than a Galaxy S23 Ultra than a Galaxy Z Fold 5 costs by itself, right? At least especially if you want to give the iPad mini maybe 256 gigs of storage, right? But that's not quite the consideration, right? Because you can buy an iPhone and then you can buy an iPad mini a year later, right? You can make yourself a little present with that. While a foldable is a one-time purchase, and people are often very stingy with one-time purchases. Like the reason for why EVs, even though in the long run they're usually way cheaper than combustion engine vehicles, are not that popular in so many regions is because the upfront cost is a lot higher, right? People don't really care that they will save a lot of money by paying for electricity rather than gas later on. They just want to pay as little upfront as possible because a lot of people don't have a lot of money saved up. A lot of people cannot afford to take up massive loans from the bank, given that especially now interest rates are pretty high, which makes that upfront cost also a substantial cost in the long run. Yeah, so I absolutely do believe that if this was below we need a below $1,500. I believe at $1,400, this is where people really would start looking differently at it. But I think at $1,499, people would actually, if this device was $1,499, I think it would actually sell really well. But I'm not sure what profitability would look like in the long run. Like, I assume this device probably makes like $300 of profit overall. Like, I cannot imagine costing more than $1,400 in production. But then all the rest is like, well, it has to flow back into new research and development costs. You have to like pay for all the factory capacity and stuff that you have created for this phone. You have to create a minimum amount of phone for it so that your like OLED orders and your chip orders and stuff like that all pay off to a degree. So yeah, below 1,500, I really don't know if they would ever be profitable with this, but at least this isn't $1,800 for 256 gigs of storage anymore. So this is already substantially better. I would say this is easily $200 better value than the Samsung Z Fold 5 currently. Its only downside is like it doesn't have like pencil support.
And unfolding is a power user feature, and power user features, as much as we love them, don't sell a ton of phones. We figured this out many times when LG spent years and years making some of the most manually adjustable cameras in the smartphone world. And now that
and we currently see that with Sony, who are doing something very similar. They like have no notches, no cutouts for the cameras. They have like big front-facing speakers. They have your 3.5 millimeter headphone jacks. They have like 21 by 9 screens that are optimized for like video watching and stuff like that. And they they have like all those manual controls for the cameras, but because the default experience actually ends up being worse, well, that really doesn't serve anybody. You need to layer those features on top of an already great mass market friendly smartphone, because while the smartphone market is large, it isn't growing at the rate it used to. So creating these niche products, these experimental devices, or those super like pro focused devices, really can only happen if you also nail the fundamentals. Then you can ask for some extra money for doing the other stuff also right, but you cannot just out of the gate say like, oh yeah, our default camera experience is like weird and not even on the level of like a 2-year-old iPhone, but yeah, we are asking $1,300 for our latest Xperia phone or something like that. Oh well, we have a 3.5 millimeter headphone jack. Like, how dare we not ask more money than an iPhone that up until last year was only in Lightning? Yeah, well, guess what? That's because most people don't care about 3.5 millimeter headphone jacks anymore. I'm right now listening to this through a USB-C port. And by the way, thank God I bought a MacBook Pro, because I currently have a USB cable connected to my microphone. I have a USB cable going to my iPhone, and I've got a USB-C port for my USB-C earpods. I would love to actually have, and then my MagSafe port is charging my MacBook. I actually would love another port on the right side that could then go up to my iPad and connect the personal hotspot directly through the wire while also charging my iPad. That would be perfect. So that is just tangential, just how many USB ports I want these days.
Make smartphones anymore. And we still have Sony, who can't stop making professional cameras in a smartphone body.
No pre-watch on this part of the video, I promise. But yeah, it's a pretty, like, of course he would have that take. Like, he presents those devices, he like covers those devices in a pretty positive way, but then has to end with his reviews with saying like, oh yeah, you know, these phones are actually not that worth it, unfortunately, because they ask that extra premium for features that are really not that mass market friendly.
But their sales are putting them in danger of the same thing. And Asus Zenphones are absolutely incredible right now for enthusiasts like myself, but they've already thrown a head fake. Clearly they're not doing super well either. I'd honestly be willing to bet, without even being able to look into anyone's books, that the folding phones are not at the top of sales in any of the lineups of any of the companies.
No, they are not.
Probably the most compelling folding phone hardware I've seen yet is this Honor phone. This thing's called the Honor Magic V2. Bro, look at this thing.
It's awesome.
It's super thin. It has
it's China exclusive, ain't it?
It's got a 3D printed titanium hinge cover, barely showing any crease when it's open. Thin bezels, nice screens all the way around. Somehow it has a 5,000 milliamp hour battery inside and high-end specs. Like playing with.
Yeah, I think that's the result of really just how small their hinge is. Honor is doing some awesome stuff. Honor is basically just the next generation of Huawei, and I really wish them the best. We need competition. I've always said that I personally would not buy Huawei or Xiaomi devices because there's so much that they steal from Apple, or just steal in general in terms of user interface design and stuff like that I just don't respect those companies. But fundamentally, as an end consumer, I will not die on the hill of intellectual property rights for like multi-trillionaire big tech companies. So I do want Apple's IP rights to be respected, but fundamentally, as long as Apple is doing all right, I am fine with some copycats being out there. And they're definitely doing a lot more besides just copying these days. So some respect for Honor here.
This phone, over almost anything else, over even Samsung's, has helped me appreciate what folding phone hardware can actually be. But despite all that awesomeness, it still has those kind of obvious downsides for a regular person to probably not pick it over a regular phone. The price, it's like $1,400. The durability, potentially compromised, we don't know. And then even though it is thin and awesome, it's still just like the power user thing of wanting to carry a slightly thicker phone around and have that extra ability is not something everyone sees as obvious and something they actually want. We are starting to finally see some of those flipping phones come at least closer to the mainstream because they are lower in price. The Z Flip 5 is down to $1,000 from Samsung, and Motorola just launched their most affordable flip yet. The Razr 40, I think, is launching soon at $600. So that seems to be getting closer, but it's just, we need a lot more of that stuff. So, folding phones are simultaneously very evolved from their beginnings just a few years ago, and yet still have a long way to go. So I guess until we get there, it's more fun for us nerds. Thanks for watching. Catch you in the next one. Peace.
I think I'll just already switch to like my regular screen. So I actually think both he and Mr. Who's the Boss have done really good reviews. I really like that they are positive on a device that definitely deserves it because it is well constructed, because it is trying to overcome some of the issues that we associate with foldables. I think its value proposition, thanks to it having more storage and more RAM than like the Samsung Fold, is also a decent one. It's definitely not necessarily great given some of the shortcomings you still have to expect from foldables. I do like that it has like a decent battery life. I do like that they put a lot of work into making the user interface work specifically for foldables, and I do like that they have like relatively high-end camera hardware, even though unfortunately it seems to be really held back by software. So I really wanted to cover this. I know this channel is like rather known for disliking foldables, but I do want to really point out that I dislike the current state of foldables. If foldables were a lot better, I would like them a lot more. I know that's like a stupidly simplistic statement, but it's true. And there's a reason for why I'm a fan of Apple, because Apple tends to really like get what they put out right, and this is why, for example, the iPad 10th generation is like such a remarkable product in the way I cover it, because I think that it's a device that has gone wrong, which is, we can all argue if like 60 Hertz is acceptable for an iPhone 15, right, at $800 in 2023. I argue it's not, but it's a value proposition. Nothing like, even the screen technology that Apple is using, the LTPS panels, they're good enough to run definitely at 90 Hertz, even at 120 Hertz, right? Apple just doesn't choose to because of battery life reasons, because it wouldn't support variable refresh rate, so if there is ever stutter, it might result in like a less smooth experience, and also of course for product differentiation. I'm not lying about that. The iPhone Pros having a variable refresh rate LTPO panels is a big reason for why non-LTPO iPhones don't have it. There is some stuff that can be right, can be wrong, but I don't think there's ever anything that Apple puts out that is just inherently compromised in the way that foldables currently are, right? I can argue a lot about stuff like for example, like the butterfly keyboard, right, on older Macs. Sure, that was bad and it shouldn't have ever been as much of a problem, but it was this specific version of the integrated keyboards, right? It's not like the actual laptop form factor was as fundamentally flawed. Well, you can argue, well, maybe at some point we'll have like front panels that actually fold without creases and stuff like that, and we have like hinges that are fully waterproof and stuff like that. That is all true, but it's all not as fundamentally solvable as the Magic Keyboard was to, as the Butterfly keyboard was to be replaced with the Magic Keyboard. Good keyboards have existed since the dawn of time. Like an easy to open up hinge for like a laptop has existed for basically decades. Having everything that goes into a foldable be solved and be on the same level as like a pro level iPhone, that is an entirely different discussion. But let's get to another different discussion. I know I'm terrible at segues. No new iMacs or iPads expected to launch for remainder of 2023. Now, I want to just quickly go through these rumors. This is by Min-Chi Kuo. I have said before, Min-Chi Kuo is not as reliable as he used to, but when he does like general statements for the next couple of weeks, which at this point we don't have that much time left, like 9 to 10 weeks in 2023. So according to him, we are not getting new iPads, no new Macs. We do not have anything to be expected in terms of like an M3 iMac. It seems like we are getting an M3 iMac sometime in 2024. That is lining up both between Min-Chi Kuo and Marc Gurman. So obviously I've talked about last weekend about how we might get like an M3 iMac or new iPads this week. It didn't happen. There are some core specs discussions here. Beyond being a 3 nanometer, I'll just not subscribe to anything here. There can always be some like differences between the mobile variant, which would be currently the A17 Pro, and the desktop variant. It's not always just doubling from what the iPhone is doing, right? The 10-core GPU, we are taking that from like the A15 and the A16, which have like 5 GPU cores, right? But the A17 Pro has 6 GPU cores. So an M3 would logically have 12 GPU cores at max, right? So some of those rumors are also based on old stuff, so I really don't want to spend too much time on it, and just tell you it seems like the M3 iMac is coming next year. If you really want an iMac, you definitely should wait, because we don't even have an M2 iMac on the market right now. You have to basically get the M1 version, which really isn't great value at this point. So no Macs this year. Basically, the only Mac we really expected this year still to come was a 24-inch iMac. That is now coming next year. We should also not expect new iPads. We expected like a mix of iPad mini announcements, iPad Air being upgraded to the M2 chip, similar to the Pro iPads, and then maybe the 10th gen iPad getting an update to like an 11th gen iPad, maybe going from an A14 chip to an A15 or an A16 chip. That doesn't seem to be happening anymore this year. It seems like this will only happen sometimes early next year, and then an iPad Pro potentially coming by around summer next year. My speculation has been WWDC, and part of that has also been the discussion that these iPads would be OLED. There is a rumor that I really want to cover very briefly, because I think it has no validity whatsoever, but I really wanted to cover this so that I have given my 2 cents about it. Again, given how sick I am, I don't know when's the next time I can actually be streaming. Maybe if I stream tomorrow, God give me the health, maybe Marc Gurman will have posted something new, and then I'll forget about that. So I really wanted to cover this. There is a rumor, I believe it's coming from Digitimes, and I like that Mac Rumors is like calling this a confusing report, that the next 12.9-inch iPad Pro would be using an LCD panel rather than the rumored OLED. But it's not just LCD that we're talking about as like a core like technology, but LCD in this case means that the backlight would go back from a mini LED backlight to just your traditional like 6-7 zone, like basically no dimming zone panel, right? Something that you had like in the 2018 versions of the iPad Pro, basically with ProMotion and all the other improvements, but then without the improvements of the M1 iPad Pro that brought mini LED to the 12.9-inch model. Right, they're also pointing to it shipping around the middle of next year, so that would line up to it. So apparently it goes back to LCD backlighting, which would match the 11-inch model, but would be a real downgrade for the 12.9-inch iPad. Also interesting that they specifically call it 12.9-inch iPad, while we have had rumors that it would go up to like 13.1 inches. Yeah, they're saying that there are high production costs of mini LED. I really don't know why that would be a problem. Apple could just raise the prices by $100. There's really no problem. Also, OLED exists. And Apple is really working on their like a custom version of OLED. So at the very worst, they would have to like maybe push the M3 iPad Pro by like 6 months to the very end of 2024 to really get like OLED production right. This is bullshit. However, there is something that could make this reporting work, and that is the potential of a 12.9-inch iPad Air. So earlier this month, 9to5Mac reported that Apple is currently developing 2 new iPad Air models, and the discussion about that was maybe we would get a bigger iPad Air. And it seems to be like, obviously the iPad Air would be like a little smaller, right? We would get like 11.1, 11.2 inches on the Pros, 10.9 inches on the Air, maybe a full 11 inches. Then we have 12.9 inch potentially on the larger iPad Air, but that would be then like 13 to 13.1 inches on the Pros. We would have OLED on the Pros. This would be either 60 Hz LCD or maybe ProMotion LCD, but definitely no mini LED backlight. So that would be, in my opinion, that would actually be a pretty clean lineup. If like the Airs had like more base storage and eventually ProMotion, I think that would make them a really, really viable solution for so many people. I just think that 64 gigabytes of base storage is unacceptable. I think that 60 Hz, once you really give it more storage and end up with a higher price point, makes that kind of difficult to swallow, given that we had like $800 iPad Pro in 2018 that had ProMotion. So in this case, if Apple ends up with OLED Pros, right, which currently sit at $799, I assume the 11-inch would go up to $899, maybe a full $1,000. At that point, I also expect it to have at least double the base storage. I expect this to go up to maybe $1299. I really am not sure. There have been like rumors about it potentially starting at $13 or $14.99. So that would make the Airs really important here, right? If the Air still started at $599, but then had like 128 gigs of base storage instead of 64, it would get the M2 chip from the iPad Pros. It would have the Stage Manager support and all that stuff. Maybe even now with Thunderbolt instead of just fast USB-C. That would be cool, and then we would have a 12.9-inch iPad Air that would be maybe $100 to $200 cheaper than a new OLED 11-inch iPad Pro, and then like $500 overall cheaper than a 13-inch OLED iPad Pro. So that would be a really, really nice differentiated lineup, and then we would have like hopefully only one cheap iPad. And then still an iPad mini maybe for people who really want like that form factor. So that would end up with us having 6 to 7 semi-regularly updated iPads, at least 5, right? If Apple ends up cutting some stuff away. Definitely, in my opinion, probably, but definitely 6, right? Because the iPad Air in one size, and then an iPad Air in another size, an iPad Pro in one size, and then an iPad Pro in another size, and then you would always have like one current gen cheap iPad, and then you would have like an iPad mini. Even if those devices get like updated far less often, they would still be in the lineup. And then we would have like overall 7 iPads if we have still like an even older, cheaper iPad in the lineup. So that would potentially be like an 11th gen iPad at $449, and then a 10th gen iPad then taking the place of the 9th gen iPad at maybe like $369, $379 or something like that. Definitely a big lineup, definitely a little confusing, but again, I deny the idea that big lineups are necessarily confusing, because choice is important, and essentially we would have an iPad Air and an iPad Pro just in different sizes, right? It wouldn't be like two completely different like platforms. Basically, this would also not, they would also neither have like completely custom designed processors. This would get like the latest gen Mac series Mac chip first, then this would get it like 9 months later or something like that. I think it could absolutely work, and given the potential for like a screen differentiation between like LCD, potentially still promotion, and then OLED, definitely with promotion, and then maybe like an iPad mini getting like OLED with no promotion, making it like really good for like reading and stuff. I think that could really work. That's a lot of speculation, but I don't want to spend too much time on it, because as I've said, this rumor is complete garbage. And the only way it could make even the slightest sense is if this rumor is true, and then the rumor we've talked about would not be about a 12.9-inch next-gen iPad Pro, but rather an iPad Air that would exist alongside it. Now, there's one more device that I would like to cover, one that we definitely didn't see this week, and definitely one that we won't get to see in quite a while, and that would be a higher-end iMac. Now, we obviously went from a lineup with a 21-inch iMac and a 27-inch iMac to a lineup with only one 24-inch iMac that currently has not been updated for a while, so this is why we've talked about potentially an M3 version. Well, this goes beyond that, beyond the M3 24-inch iMac happening in 2024, and that would be a mini LED based 32-inch display enabled 2025 iMac. Right, we don't know if it will be running on like M3 Pros, M3 Max, maybe at that point on M4 chips or something like that. It would be sort of like a successor to the iMac Pro. We don't know where exactly it would be priced. That would heavily depend on what like its base processor would be, and base storage, base RAM configuration, stuff like that. I definitely don't expect it to have a base M series chip. I think it would at least have to start with a Pro chip, maybe even with a Max chip for like maximum bandwidth for its I/O ports and stuff like that. I think by the time it comes out in 2025, it definitely will have like Thunderbolt 5 capabilities. At 32 inches, if Apple keeps like their 220 ppi Retina display goal, then it would be a 6K panel, similar to the Pro Display XDR. It would, if it would be mini LED, it would most likely have at this point significantly more dimming zones than the Pro Display XDR. So that's a lot of potentially very expensive tech to put into a device. So a base price of like $4,000 would not be surprising. Maybe even $5,000. Hell, that's how much the Pro Display XDR costs. And this would be like a fully enabled computer. So we have had rumors for a while about a 27-inch iMac that would be coming, that would be mini LED and stuff like that. That apparently is now gone. I think Apple suspects that there's just not enough differentiation between 27 inches and 24 inches. So I think one would absolutely kill the other unless they would be like ridiculously differently priced. But at that point they would have to overprice the 27-inch iMac because the 24-inch already ain't cheap. And I doubt they would want to like lower their margins on it that significantly. So they would instead use the potential high price tag to justify it with a 32-inch mini LED one instead of rather than having just a slightly larger iMac that would have like a faster chip or something like that. So yeah, it's interesting because again, the Pro Display XDR is $5,000 with a pretty outdated mini LED display at this point. For example, the iPad has like 4 times the number of display dimming zones on like a 4 times smaller display when we look at the surface area. So definitely not something that you would want these days for $5,000. Even if you were comparing it to like reference monitors that cost a lot, at least those are OLED and like you have real like pixel to pixel perfect contrast. So definitely not what you would want. I definitely would want also something for $5,000 with a 60 hertz panel. I highly assume this would be 120 hertz, similar to how your M1 Pro and M1 Max MacBook Pros came out with mini LED promotion screens, and how the M1 iPad Pro came in the 12.9-inch version with a 120 hertz ProMotion mini LED screen. So I assume this would match it. Maybe at that point Apple would decide that they could like potentially buy like an 8K cut down panel, right? An OLED panel and just use it for this. It would still be ridiculously expensive given how expensive 8K panels are, but this could still work. Maybe Apple changes their mind on this as well. It seems like the iMac is really in flux given the popularity between the Mac Mini, the Mac Studio. They now also have the Mac Pro, which maybe not be that popular, but definitely is like at least doing something the iMac definitely wouldn't be able to. So that's interesting, but in my opinion, this still is something that I would look at with some skepticism, given that this is supposed to be only coming in 2025. So this was a collection of a lot of iPad and Mac rumors. I really wanted to cover that quickly because I know that a lot of people are really interested about it. Maybe I'll cut out that portion, make it a standalone video. But for now, I want to get to something else, to basically my last point of the day. And that would be my impressions of Spider-Man 2 on PS5. I know that it's not necessarily what a lot of my viewers care about, but I do. I want to use SkillUp's review as a baseline to give you my impressions. Because again, when else will I get to talk about it? I'm almost finished with it. I've invested quite a lot of time into it in the last 36 hours. So I have a lot to say. And let's see if that lines up with SkillUp, because I haven't yet watched its review beyond like the first 3 minutes.
A new smart coffee table, the perfect glow up for any living room or gaming room. Not only does it look nice, but it's got an inbuilt wireless charger, a speaker allowing you to connect via Bluetooth. Oh, and did I mention it's got a cheeky little fridge hiding inside? I just got one of these and it's been a massive upgrade to my setup. If you're interested, click the link below or stick around to the end.
Man, I wish so many of those accessories had like proper MagSafe and stuff like that. I also don't like glossy surfaces. They get like really smudgy. Granted, I don't have a cat. My mom has a cat. Yeah, like, so that wouldn't be that much of a problem for me, but still, man, maybe they have like a matte option though. This looks dope.
End of the video to learn more. Let's start with a spoiler disclaimer. I'm going to be extremely stingy with the footage I use here. I'll really stick to some nondescript cutscenes, to some set pieces you might have seen in trailers, to general open world stuff and side missions. So much of the impact of this game rests in its visual spectacle, and I don't want to take any of that away from you. If this is the first review you're watching, I'd recommend listening to reviews rather than watching them. That includes this one if you're particularly sensitive to spoilers. Okay, so with that out the way, let me say this. I know why you're here. You are not here to find out if Spider-Man 2 is good. You already know that Spider-Man 2 is good. You haven't played it yet, but you've got 2 eyes and 2 ears, and even if you don't, you can feel it in your jellies. This is a good video game, no two ways about it. What you want to know is this better than the first game, Spider-Man 2018, or the smaller spin-off, Miles Morales, released back in 2021? The answer to that is an unequivocal yes.
Yeah, it is. It's like the combat is more fun for both Peters. I have said before that I think that Miles Morales was like a big glow up for the combat over Spider-Man 2018. I think the story is while in a way there are like a lot of detours that you can take with it, I think it's actually like really focused and has like really good themes, similar to Spider-Man 2018, and I think it gets its emotional highs beyond the finale, which I cannot yet talk about because I haven't played it yet, about as right as Miles Morales did, which I liked more in that regard as well, which I think that while the emotional high and the end of 2018's Spider-Man with Dr. Octavius was by far the best, I think that like how you get there with the pacing and stuff like that, and is he called Mr. Negative? That fight I didn't like as much in Spider-Man 2018. So Miles Morales was like the better paced game with better combat. But not quite as much as successfully working emotional heights for me. And this one seems to be getting the balance better than either. And I just yet have to know if the finale of Spider-Man 2 is about as emotionally satisfying or impactful, I should say, as the finale of Spider-Man 2018.
Game looks vastly better owing to the power of the PS5 and how it's been put to work.
Amazing, like non-existing loading times. It's like a fantastic, best I've ever seen in a console game level of detail management, where you barely see any pop-in even while moving at like 4 or 5 times the speed of the previous gen, if you're like using like your web wings and in some pre-scripted scenarios. So absolutely phenomenally visually, a lot of like physics-based particle simulation and stuff like that. Really fantastic handling of the black suit with the symbiote. So some really, really impressive technical handling here, all running at a very, very smooth 60 FPS while still hitting around 1440p. I know it can have small drops into like 57, 58 FPS. I know it can drop down to around 1000p, even slightly below 1080p, but the temporal anti-aliasing is so good you hardly feel the difference to like a regular 1440p image that gets upscaled to 4K. Well, upscale is not the right word. There is no FSR here or anything, but that gets like tuned for a 4K panel more or less. Fantastic audio work. I played it with some really good integrated TV speakers while I'm at my mom's, and it still sounds fantastic. Obviously, if you have like a surround sound system, now that they also have like high channel support on the PS5, that will be fantastic. So technically immaculate. I've had like a crash, and I've had 2 times where I had to restart the game because I was soft locked. But in the actual game, I have like 0 glitches. I have like no glitches in combat, no glitches in cutscenes or anything else like that. So that's pretty fascinating almost, because usually if like when Miles Morales came out, it came a little hot, right? And I've had like 2 crashes, but I've also had like some noticeable glitches in the game, at least before there was a patch like a week into it. Not like the day 1 patch doesn't fix everything. And what you end up getting there is a game that feels like it's coming in a little hot. Well, with Spider-Man 2, you get a game that is 100% perfect until the moment it isn't, and you're almost confused at the very idea that there could be anything wrong with this game. Like the last 10 hours I've played have been completely bug free, but then before that I've had like those soft lock scenarios and stuff like that. So very interesting. And by the way, those were 100% like soft locks through software, because I restarted and the button prompt that just didn't show up then showed up. So that's 100% accurate here.
It makes use of the DualSense controller in both novel and meaningful ways.
I can actually recommend you tune down the vibration settings on the DualSense by like 1 level, because it's really strong. It will drain the battery life pretty quickly because of it, and it depending on if you like it or not, it can maybe get a little uncomfortable. I personally like the DualSense at maximum, but I know, and I have 2 controllers, so I have no battery life problems, but I know that some people really don't like it. So before you get like confused as to what exactly your DualSense is doing, just tune it down by default a setting and you'll be perfectly fine. Unless you're like me and you know you actually enjoy it.
It has a bigger world to explore, now incorporating both Brooklyn and Queens. It has deeper, more flexible combat, it has more enemy types, more open world activities, more big action set pieces, and most importantly, more Spider-Man, since Spider-Man 2 is told from the perspective of both Miles and Peter, allowing you to switch freely between them while exploring the open world, though the missions all require you to play one Spidey or the other, depending on which part of the story Insomniac want to tell in that moment. In conjunction with all of the more that Spider-Man 2 offers, the quality of this package cannot be overstated. From graphical fidelity to loading times to how bug-free it is, except for the spiders, to the strength of the voiceover.
They actually made a bug versus like spiders joke in it, where Peter was like, actually, spiders are not bugs, which really fit well with like his nerdy stuff. So they're really getting the characters right. I would say this is as quippy as the first 2 games, but they don't try to be as funny in a way, where I think the writing actually reflects very well that the characters are actually a little awkward and nerdy, even though obviously they're like cool superheroes. I actually think the characters in this game are immaculately represented, especially given the difficult phase of their lives that they're trying to cover, with Peter trying to find a new job, reconnecting with his old friend, Miles trying to get into college and stuff like that. Obviously none of that is a spoiler, that has all been in trailers and stuff like that. But yeah, I actually think that the characters in this game really are what elevates it, and I think that it's already been like the strongest part of Spider-Man 2018 and Miles Morales, and the fact that they're doing now more characters simultaneously, that correctly, is a real sentiment to just how good Insomniac is these days at writing stories that are highly character driven. Really, my big respect for it.
The unbelievable combat that regularly looks and feels so good that it's hard to believe that you are actually controlling these characters as they do all of this stuff. It's genuinely remarkable. Sadly, when it comes to many AAA games in the modern era, so much of our time is spent talking about them being unfinished or broken or patchy storytelling.
Yeah, like it took Cyberpunk 3 years to get to an acceptable level where it actually is like technologically impressive while actually running well. And sure, it might be considered more open world than Spider-Man, because Like you also have like a lot of world going on, while Spider-Man is mostly like an open terrain that you traverse, and then you have like story missions or whether it be main or side happening throughout it. I'll just don't take that excuse. Like those games are also for so long in development with potentially even larger teams than Insomniac. I think part of the problem really has to do with like optimizing for different platforms. Cyberpunk was like really held back by the mere idea of having those games run on PS4 and Xbox One. And then you had like a pretty impressive PC version. But because there was like so much polishing for different platforms, no version ended up being polished. Just one version ended up having better access to more powerful hardware. And then obviously now it's only PS5 and Xbox Series X for the 2.0 patch with Phantom Liberty, and now it supports all the like your DLSS 3.5 stuff on PC. So there's a lot of good stuff going on, RT Overdrive and stuff like that. But when it comes to console games, this is now the best looking open world console game ever made by far. Nothing is even close. Look at the Digital Foundry like technical review of it. It's amazing. The fact that they're making that run at 60 FPS that well is like just and without like a ton of loading screens, it's just a big like big indictment of just how bad Starfield was, to be honest.
Of game design elements that clearly have been properly thought out or tested. Not so with anything Insomniac have released over the last few years, and certainly not so here in Spider-Man 2. It is an utterly complete and polished package that continues to cement Insomniac as one of the greatest studios working today. So, by every tangible metric, this is a better game than Spider-Man 2018. But I do suspect that the conversation around Spider-Man 2 will center on the more intangible metrics. The characters, the story, how much innovation is brought to bear across the experience, and how it leaves you feeling at the end.
No, I suspect this will not be happening. I think this will be like the anti-Sony Twitter gamers sphere, where they'll be like, oh, all games are like over-the-shoulder cinematic stuff, even though you can do like some of the most crazy shit ever with those Spider-Man. But in my opinion, I think focusing on innovation in a Spider-Man 2 that comes out like 3 years barely after Spider-Man Miles Morales, where it's like complaining that Spider-Man 2, the movie, like still takes place in New York and like no, and offers like a different supervillain than Spider-Man 1. Like you don't necessarily want that much to change, you just want a different scenario with a different villain that creates a different internal conflict in the hero. It's that easy. And it's extremely hard to achieve that in a really satisfying way. And that's what Spider-Man 2 definitely does. What innovation would I need here? Like, I guess co-op would be nice, but if you actually play the game, you will quickly understand that co-op is not how the story is structured whatsoever. The story is actually really clear about that the Spider-Man exist in different like areas of New York. Not because they live in different areas of New York, but because they cover as much ground as possible. It's part of their work ethos, and so having them always side by side would make no sense story-wise. And when you look at the actual combat, it's not the only thing that would justify having co-op would be just to double down always on the number of enemies you encounter, which if you actually go through those games can often already be too much. Like it's sometimes if I would have to criticize the game even a little bit, it feels like you're sometimes doing button mashing, not because you're actually doing like dumb button mashing, but because you're encountering one enemy in the second, the third, and the fourth, and fifth, and the sixth, and the seventh, and the eighth, and of course that's you will do some repetitive stuff, right? Not because the enemies are somehow bad or anything, but because there are so many to fight. This is why the occasional like mini boss battle is actually a really fun diversion, because that's when you usually get that one main mini boss, maybe with like 2 helpers, and then you have to find the one specific strategy to find this enemy rather than to fight 9 enemies at a time.
End of it. Spider-Man 2018 left.
And and with co-op that would mean what, 15, 16 enemies all the time? Nah. No thanks.
You pretty damn blown away. When those credits rolled, there was little doubt that you had just played through one of the best superhero games ever made.
But I am having the same feeling right now with Spider-Man 2.
A brilliant retelling of the Spider-Man mythos, starring not only his closest friends and loved ones, but also a pantheon of almost every iconic Spider-Man villain. Not all of them, of course, but a lot of them. And coupled with the emotional gut punches that game was willing to dish out at the back end, Spider-Man 2018 felt like a king hit from out of nowhere. It's hard to recreate that feeling, but
but it doesn't also need to. I would argue that you don't always need to recreate the surprise factor, right? It can work, right? I would argue that The Empire Strikes Back is probably as surprising. Well, it's not as surprising, right, as the original Star Wars, but I think its overall quality level is much higher, and that's why it's like seen as a big surprise that you can do a sequel that definitely feels very new. However, here, this isn't even the second game, it's technically the third in a way, like, how much can you really do? Like, I would argue if they introduced Miles Morales in this game, then it would be incredibly innovative and new, but they offered us an early option to play as Miles, and I think that was the right decision. It allows us to forego his origin story, actually, in a separate game, or to be jam-packed into this game. Like, in the original Spider-Man 2018, Miles' origin story was coincidental with the other story surrounding Peter. Then in Miles Morales, this was Miles' hero origin story, right? Not necessarily his powers origin story, but it gave him like even more character motivation. It built upon his dad dying in Spider-Man 2018 and stuff like that, and it confronted him with scenarios where he had to make hard choices. In Spider-Man 2, obviously you cannot put either scenario now in. It cannot be the first time Miles makes a hard choice. It cannot be the first time where he encounters loss, because that was in Spider-Man 2018. And it cannot be the first time where we feel his combat. But we do have even better combat for both Miles and significantly better Peter combat. We do have hard choices for both of them to make that are in some ways continuations of the choices they had to make in prior games, or sometimes completely new ones. Again, I'm also trying to be spoiler free here. And yeah, it asks them to like really double down or fully give up their ethics as Spider-Man. Like if they stand by the choices they made when they became Spider-Man, what it means, what you would do in order to gain more power so you can better support the people you love, and what it would mean if you ended up losing yourself in order to gain that power. Really, really crucial. Great power comes great responsibility themes. Really great continuation of the original themes, adding some new themes on top. How much innovation I actually need when everything is better? Story, visuals, combat? I don't know.
It is possible. I think God of War Ragnarok managed to find a new level, not through its core gameplay, but in the expansiveness and functionality of its...
God of War Ragnarok is one of the best games ever made, and it's a sequel to one of the other best games ever made. Yes, is God of War Ragnarok technically better than Spider-Man 2? Probably, yeah, I would say so. I would say the combat is better tuned in God of War Ragnarok in a way, because it's more one-to-one encounters, which usually end up feeling more curated rather than like when you're fighting, as I said, 8-9 enemies simultaneously often. The story has like great like themes and historical and mythical like overtones. I would say the world feels definitely a little smaller. I mean, it objectively is in the terms of like it's very much linear God of War, even though you have like some wider open areas to explore. The traversal is not nearly as fun as in Spider-Man. I would say you don't get as much fun out of it, even though, as I've said before, God of War Ragnarok is a much funnier game than some people expected it to be. I think the dialogue is supremely well written. I think the stories that Mimir tells while you're on the go with him are phenomenal, and they end up teaching you life lessons, stuff like that. Not quite as impactful as the stories he tells in God of War 2018. But that comes down to obviously because he already blew a lot of his load about like giants and the Einherjar in God of War 2018, telling you all the stories about Odin and stuff like that. Yes, God of War, both 2018 and Ragnarok are both better than any of the Spider-Man games, but they're some of the best games ever made. Spider-Man does not need to be quite as good to still be fantastic. That's my argument.
Open worlds, and in particular in its storytelling, which introduced so many new characters and did incredible things with all of them. Most importantly, it used our knowledge of an ancient prophecy as a jumping-off point for all manner of narrative chicanery, subverting expectations at every turn. And Sony
that's true. I recommend you watch
SkillUp's
God of War Ragnarok review.
The story of Kratos is their story, and it's an original story. No one can tell them no, and we as an audience can't bring any preconceptions to it. It's not like that for Spider-Man. Firstly, this isn't Insomniac's character, it's Marvel's. And that sort of partnership is naturally going to create some constraints, especially for a character as popular and ubiquitous as Spider-Man. More than that though, the stories that are told with this character usually aren't new stories. They're remixes of old stories, ones we've been told and retold countless times over.
Well, yeah, in the state that we're currently in, unless they really go out of their way to like make up new characters and just insert them into the Spider-Man mythos, and they would have to like basically run that by Marvel, make sure that they kind of accept it. We do sometimes have like movie original, TV show original characters, but mostly we do get new characters in comic books, and then those characters get like adopted in some way, shape, or form in movies, TV shows, games. I would argue that like the Batman TV show introducing Harley Quinn is a pretty good example, but granted that was definitely like very much supported by was it Warner Brothers by that point? Let's just say DC. And with Marvel, it's like it can be a little more oversighty. They're under Disney, so definitely really interested in protecting their intellectual property. Though I would say that the stories that are being told here, for one, they do forgo a lot of origin stuff, which is awesome, because I do like origin stories, but I don't like them for Spider-Man anymore. We just had too many Spider-Mans at this point. I know people sometimes complain when like a new superhero movie is like an origin story. I don't get it. It's like, yeah, why wouldn't I want to see how a hero came to be? Like, Batman Begins is one of the best superhero movies ever made. Iron Man is one of the best superhero movies ever made. So why wouldn't I want to see it? But yeah, with Spider-Man, I think they're having pretty much the perfect balance of like it's an existing character. You pretty much know they're doing some mix of like flashbacks and like some narrative storytelling where they will just drop a line or two about what had happened prior with that character, and then they will rely a little bit on like the general knowledge from a mass audience, be it deep knowledge from like comic book fans or like really like superficial knowledge from people who just watch movies and TV shows, and I think it works. So yeah.
Over the years in comics, cartoons, movies, and games, there's great comfort in that, but it also allows us to see the twists and turns coming before they do.
Yeah.
Which naturally dulls some of their sharpness and cut through.
But granted, I saw most twists and turns coming in God of War Ragnarok, except the most major one, I guess. Well, I accepted. Well, I think I can spoil, right? Well, I didn't expect like Odin to be Tyr, but I expected Tyr to be weird because Tyr behaved weird, right? They set it up. I'm pretty decent at reading the tea leaves there in games and shows. I didn't quite expect it to be Odin because I didn't quite know if that made full sense with when we saw Odin and when we saw Tyr and stuff like that. And then the other thing, and that had nothing to do obviously with subverting expectations necessarily. It's just that it could happen because again it's an original story by Sony Santa Monica. I expected Kratos to die. Granted, from a franchise perspective, I actually expected him to survive in some way, shape, or another. I mean, Kratos is kind of known to come back from the dead. And then he told this beautiful story to Atreus about that old man asking death to come for him. But when death arrives, he only asks him to pick up the sticks with him so that he can bring firewood to his village. Because he changed his mind. That was really beautiful. It always makes me cry. I'm such a softie for the stuff in God of War for some reason. I know I'm babbling about, but I just always don't like when people are like, well, God of War was like original. I'm like, yeah, I know that Spider-Man, neither Peter nor Miles were gonna die, especially in this game. If any of them are gonna die, it's gonna happen in the third one. Or if it would have happened, it would have happened in Spider-Man 1. Granted, I'm not at the end of the story. They might die still. It's just I don't expect them to. But if any Spider-Man had died, it would have been Spider-Man Peter in like the first game, and then like Miles would have taken over. But now they very much exist as just friends and stuff. Like killing Peter would have like no narrative purpose for Miles anymore, because Miles is already his own standalone Spider-Man. He just works together with Peter sometimes. Like they're not really even mentor and student anymore as you go through the game progressing. Miles is very, very much self-aware, self-confident, and powerful. Thank God.
A little bit of that going on in Spider-Man 2. This definitely has some new elements that I found moving and powerful, in particular the way Spider-Man 2 depicts the friendship between Peter and Harry, the complex relationship between Peter and Miles Miles' personal journey as it relates to the death of his father at the hands of Martin Lee, aka Mr. Negative. These things ring out and are the emotional high points for a game that is, by and large, not going to surprise you with its story beats, and that I think also manages to mishandle a few of the other core relationships. This predictability is also present on the gameplay front. New combat options, enemy types, and open world activities.
Okay, this is about as far as I watched the video, so I don't know which relationships he believes were mismanaged. So if he mentions them in the future, obviously I will comment on it because I don't know what exactly he meant.
Open up different gameplay experiences we couldn't get elsewhere. None of this is to say that Spider-Man 2 isn't an absolutely superb game, because it is. Like I said, by the numbers, this is a better game by almost every metric. But the stuff that you can't measure, that's where Spider-Man 2 didn't quite knock me on my ass the way that the first game did. For those who have not yet experienced an Insomniac Spider-Man game before, boy are you in for a treat, let me tell you. But if you're returning to these characters in this city after Spider-Man 2018 and Miles Morales, Spider-Man 2 is going to feel more familiar and comfortable rather than amazing or spectacular.
nice joke on like Amazing and Spectacular Spider-Man. I don't know. I guess I'm a really grateful person for when I get something new that is high quality in a way that I know I will enjoy it, right? I go to my favorite steakhouse every 2 weeks and get like the same meal, right? And it's extraordinarily expensive, but I love it, and I don't really choose to experiment too much with it because I know what I want and I get it and I pay for it, and I'm really glad that I experienced it. Like, do I need a ton of innovation in my lamb chops to enjoy them even further? Like, I've tried them with different sauces and stuff like that. I don't want, like, sure, with food, I'm happy to get the same thing over and over again. But with games, I don't want necessarily this exactly the same thing as I would want with food. It just so happens, though, it's still like, it's a good Spider-Man story. It's not the same Spider-Man story. It is happening in New York, but it's a larger New York. It's a more beautiful New York. It's a New York that is easier to traverse, and it's fun to play with a very similar combat system, but with expanded abilities to Spider-Man, even more suits to choose from, and a suit that offers up completely new powers, and then you open up new powers also with like story progression. So yeah, why wouldn't I like this as much as I like my delicious lamb chops?
Spider-Man 2 picks up immediately after the events of Spider-Man 2018 and Miles Morales. You're slipping into some familiar territory here with Peter and MJ, Miles and his high school buddies. They're each struggling in their own way. Peter finding it hard to hold down a full-time job while having to randomly disappear to go and save the city. And Miles struggling to focus on his college admission essay when he keeps getting the itch to go do Spidey things. It's that central tension that's always been at the heart of Spider-Man, how demanding that suit is, exacting a heavy toll on not only those who wear it, but on the friends and family around them. We've seen this story endlessly riffed on over the years, but it's rare to see it play out for Miles and Peter simultaneously. That's the beating heart of Spider-Man 2, the fact that there are two Spider-Men, both of them facing the exact same challenges but in totally different ways. In the past, they've each needed to carry this burden alone because who else could possibly understand it? But here, they work as a team, they fight side by side, and they confide in each other. Peter does play the role of mentor, sort of, but no one's an expert at being a Spider-Man, Peter included. And so they're both kind of figuring this out as they go, making plenty of...
That's a smart thing to point out. Peter knows as much about being Spider-Man as Miles. He just has been Spider-Man for longer. While that sure opens him up to have more experience, it doesn't necessarily come with as much extra wisdom as some people might hope. Peter had a big wisdom and experience advantage over Miles in 2018 because obviously just managing the powers and stuff like that's one thing. Wait, I'm sorry guys, I think I'll have to open my mom the door for her. I'll be right back. Sorry guys, I closed the door with the key so my mom couldn't come in.
Mistakes along the way, and some of the most memorable and touching moments in the game happen when the two of them are just hanging out, perched high above the cityscape, chatting about how hard it is to be a Spider-Man.
Yeah, the emotional stuff works. I don't think there's too much that I could change here from what SkillUp is saying.
We'll put Lee back where he belongs. Promise. Don't leave me hanging. Try to soak over here. Not on my watch. Come on.
Special mention has to go to the way the relationship between Peter and Harry is built up. Harry has reappeared in Peter's life after spending time recovering from a chronic illness, and Peter is overjoyed, but we as an audience can't buy into that immediately because we don't know this Harry. What follows is a number of really fantastically constructed scenes where the two of them are both rediscovering their friendship. They'll go on a bike ride together and just chat about old times. They'll shoot hoops while shooting the shit. Just two dudes being bros on the court.
Yeah, it's really, really well set up. You end up feeling a lot for Harry really early on in the story, and again, big compliments to Insomniac here for how they executed this.
One of the best sequences in the game is this flashback sequence where Peter and Harry are trying to break into their old high school, and they're remembering when they first did this as teenagers, and it's this combination of tender storytelling and clever puzzle-style gameplay. Since Peter needs to use his Spidey powers to avoid the gaze of a lurking security guard, it culminates in a really...
There's a really fun line here where Peter says he like hides the web fluids for the web shooters somewhere in I don't know what it's called, the room where you like process pictures, right, with chemicals and stuff like that. And he's like, I need to get better at fluid management. And I'm like, yeah, typical teen.
Important emotional moment. And as a result of this scene and others like it, I was really bought in on this bromance. I could see how much it meant to Peter and how high the stakes would eventually become when that relationship was eventually threatened. One of those threats is some new threads that Peter gets his hands on, the symbiote suit. Again, not...
Such an awesome thing to play with. And you don't get just to play as Black Suit Peter. Just an FYI, you can take it however you want.
I'm not going to spoil anything about this except to say that you probably already know that the symbiote suit is not our friend. It does bad things to us, including but not limited to making us very cranky. Peter's acquisition of the symbiote suit is a real high point for the game because it's when we get to start seeing Peter's voice actor, Yuri Lowenthal, absolutely burn the place down with his performance. You're used to this sort of nervous, nerdy, emotionally needy Peter Parker and a cocky, smart-mouthed Spider-Man. The symbiote suit brings out this whole other side of Peter. Angry, vengeful, selfish, and at times cruel. If you've seen this story told in the past, it isn't surprising, but I really think the way Lowenthal delivers this transformation and opens up this other side of Peter is just so worth watching. There's been...
Yeah, the performances in the game overall are amazing, and this is one of the few games where I would actually say that the main performance is absolutely... Like it's not, when I say it's what carries it, I don't mean that anything else around it is like subpar, but usually you can find like a secondary character or side character that really sometimes overshadows the main character because they get to be like more quirky, more weird, more interesting, more funny. In this way, it's absolutely Peter's story. Like, I know Miles does a lot of stuff, and the voice actor of Miles does a really good job, but like Yuri Lowenthal, what he delivers with Peter here is absolutely amazing, and it's absolutely tuning into this game just for that.
A lot of fantastic voice performances this year, from Resident Evil to Final Fantasy 16 to Baldur's Gate 3 and beyond, but I would absolutely class Lowenthal's performance as Symbiote Spider-Man as one of the best performances of the year. A true standout in a game full of standout performances.
Meaning something.
Miles was off his game. We almost had Lizard.
I'm sure he was just trying to help.
Sometimes it's just easier to do things myself.
It's not a spoiler to say that there are two antagonists in Spider-Man 2, Kraven and Venom. Kraven is... I don't know, man. He doesn't do much for me.
Yeah, that is 100% true, and this is something that I will have to 100% agree with and 200% disagree with. Kraven is the inciting incident. Kraven is the situation that the Spider-Man find themselves in. The actual conflict is internal, and it's accelerated by the symbiote. It's not Kraven's story. He's not the Joker or anything else like it. He later on you'll find that he has a slightly more interesting motivation than just Kraven a hunt, right? But he is not the main villain of the story whatsoever. The internal conflict of the people there is the main villain, I guess.
An interesting through line of some of the best Spider-Man villains is that each of them could walk through Spider-Man's front door and be welcomed in by Aunt May or Miles' mother. Norman Osborn carving turkey in the Sammy Raimi movies. The Vulture being MJ's dad in Tom Holland's Spidey movies. The Prowler being Miles' uncle in Into the Spider-Verse. Doc Ock, the Lizard, Martin Lee, the list goes on. Obviously, you can't do this forever. Spider-Man can't be related or IRL friends with everyone he ends up fighting, But there's something in that definitely is not present in Kraven, and nothing else replaces it. He's a fairly
In terms of just villains, no. But everything else replaces it. Like, there's a villain where one of the Spider-Man has to think about potentially ending his life so that he can survive. The symbiote will have to force Peter to make an important decision twice when it comes to what the symbiote suit offers, not just to Peter, but also to somebody very important to Peter. And that is the villainy of the story. It's Kraven setting up big scenarios that end up forcing people to choose and potentially be lesser than they actually appear. Not heroes, potentially bad people overall.
remarkable villain by many metrics. Inexplicably well-resourced, needlessly cruel, quite one-dimensional compared to even some of the lesser villains that Spider-Man has squared.
There are explanations for it, and that explanation basically comes down to that he is not caring for a lot of extra time here. So, investing a lot of resources and being extra cruel comes with that. It makes sense in the game. Granted, that's not a lot of extra explanation, but it is explanation that works.
Off against. Kraven serves as a powerful catalyst for events in ways that I won't spoil, but he's almost incidental to the broader plot. And I do wonder if this villain was chosen as the focus because Sony have a Kraven movie coming out soon, and they needed to up his brand recognition. That sounds more cynical than I really am about this villain. He's fine. He has some moments, but yeah.
I would argue that there isn't that much more to pick when it comes to Spider-Man that really would elevate like the story by default. I know Green Goblin, but I very strongly believe that Green Goblin will be the end of the trilogy. And then there are a lot of like your other villains, like your Mysterio. Obviously, you have like your all your Sinister Six people that have already been shown to a degree in the previous game as well, and some of the very well-known villains pop up in this game. The problem with any kind of villain that isn't related or a deep friend, which again, there is another villain in this game, that isn't that close to the people. You like, it's not impossible. You definitely, like, the Joker isn't related to the Batman, at least not by blood or by direct friendship, but they have this very intricate thing where they are like almost like two sides of the same coin to a degree, where people who were shaped by like one bad day, and granted that not all Joker stories cover that really well either, and Kraven, it almost incidentally becomes the other side of the coin to Peter by being the more decisive person to put out villains, right? Peter is all for rehabilitation and for putting them in jail, while Kraven is more like, yeah, I'll just kill them. He doesn't kill them because they're villains. He kills them because they are like great beasts that he wants to hunt. So incidentally, he does also serve as another theme here, a theme of doing more decisive things, but it's never really acknowledged that what he does has any sort of value. It's pretty early on established that it's just evil what he does. I wish that the game had given him a slightly more nuanced take by also giving him the perspective of like, I'm doing what you cannot do, Peter, but I'm also doing it because I'm having fun.
For me personally, he just doesn't really do much. The other villain is Venom, and to be honest with you, it's impossible for me to talk about him without spoiling stuff, so I'm just not going to. I'm also not going to show you footage of him in action, because I think that this is like the most terrifying and intimidating rendition of Venom that I have ever seen. the physicality.
Oh my god, they're just one step away from being R-rated or like I guess mature. Like the way Venom is shown, it's so amazing. It's 100% worth playing this just for Venom.
Power of Venom. I don't think any film or cartoon, and certainly no video game, has captured it as well as Insomniac have captured it here. He is transfixing whenever he's on screen. You feel like nervous seeing him so much as look at another character in the story because you immediately fear for their safety. I have thoughts about how the whole Venom arc plays out, stuff I'll maybe share on the podcast when we're past the statute of limitations on spoilers. But the way Venom looks and sounds and moves...
I might do a review in like a week or something.
While certain character relationships stand out as high points, as does the whole symbiote suit thing and what it means for everyone involved,
okay.
You can kind of guess where, like...
I guess we'll find now where he means it falls flat or
80
short.
to 90% of this story is going to go before it gets there. You absolutely could say the same of many Spider-Man stories, including Spider-Man 2018, but that game was surprising for a lot of reasons, not just its narrative. It was the first time we were introduced to that rendition of New York City, to that web-slinging, to that combat, to that Peter Parker before he got his facelift. There was also that pantheon of villains, which was just like, it was like a Saturday morning cartoon marathon where they only played the hits. So there was a lot in that package that really surprised, and I think similar to God of War Ragnarok, if Insomniac were going to recapture that magic, then I think it needed to be in a more challenging Spider-Man story, one that made us rethink this.
But God of War Ragnarok ends the Norse saga. Spider-Man 2 cannot break the universe of Spider-Man because there will be Spider-Man 3 and I would bet there will be a Spider-Man Miles Morales 2.
Mythos. Spider-Man 2 doesn't...
There was also like a multiplayer game from Insomniac that probably, in order to not piss off Marvel, they cannot change too much. I think they are honestly going as far as they can, and I think they're doing an extremely good job.
Do that, either because of constraints or intent. Spider-Man 2 is quite predictable, and while it's always a great story, well told, it does leave you feeling as though you've heard big chunks of it before. And
I have a counter argument to the predictability when it comes to timeless stories. And let's be honest, since comic book movies have now sort of become the mythological stories of our day, they have become timeless and they can be riffed upon, but they rarely will be changed entirely without like alienating a substantial portion of the audience. There are twists in this game that you absolutely could see coming. I don't think everybody will, but this is part of a new generational appeal. This is not, this is a story for a 55-year-old man who has read Spider-Man comics all his life. But this is also a story for a 15-year-old kid who is playing the second Spider-Man or third Spider-Man game in his life, starting with Spider-Man 2018 and Miles Morales. Like, those stories are opening up the universe to a completely new generation of people, and the higher quality those stories are, the more likely it is that the next generation will riff on those stories even better. I would argue this is better than the Spider-Man movies under Sam Raimi. It's definitely better than his take on the symbiote. Granted, that was screwed up by the studio, but you know what I'm saying, right? The fact that it's not surprising you in that major ways, to a Spider-Man comic book reader, the movies already weren't that surprising. There are people who only play video games and they don't watch that many movies or TV shows and certainly don't read that many comic books. To them, a lot of this will be surprising. Some people who will play this will be very young still and will not yet have had the chance to read a ton of comic books or watch a ton of movies. They might watch the new Marvel Spider-Man movies with Tom Holland, and they feel very, very distinct from this. This is much more in line with the Raimi movies, and in that way I like them also way more. So no, I don't think that not being surprising here is bad.
Absolutely superb as the rest of the game is. The rest of the game fits into that overall pattern. Spider-Man 2 is a remarkably good-looking video game that runs spectacularly well across a variety of configurations. I say that because Spider-Man 2 offers 3 different graphical settings. There's your 4K high-fidelity mode at 30 FPS, there's a 4K performance mode targeting 60 FPS, and wedged in between the two of those is a cheeky 4K performance.
There's more. There's also a VRR mode that unlocks all of those modes, and it works actually in different ways. And I will explain that with regards to the performance mode, because then it's the most apparent. With the VRR mode, you can either fully unlock the 60 FPS, and then it will run it up to like 80, sometimes 90 FPS. But obviously then it will not try to hit higher resolutions as aggressively as the 60 FPS mode will still try to do. There is a VR smoothed out mode where it will still try to hit 60 but less aggressively so, and then really favor like always almost hitting 1440p, because it knows that by dropping to 55 FPS it will still be smooth on a VRR monitor or TV. And then there's the VRR off mode, obviously, which is just bad if you don't have, like, it's not bad because obviously the game still hits like 60 FPS very well, but it's unfortunate for people who don't have VR screens. Hell, I'm not playing it on a VR screen. My mom doesn't have a VR TV while I'm still here, but I do have my LG C2 at home, so that's definitely awesome. But you don't need it. 60 FPS runs really well, but whenever I can, I play Sony games at the VR unlocked mode at around 80 or 90 FPS. I did that with God of War, where it actually often hit like around 100 FPS. I did that with Horizon Forbidden West, which usually hit like 90 FPS often, or at least 80, and this one seems to hit between 70 and 80 on a regular basis given the testing of Digital Foundry.
Targeting 40 FPS. If you're wondering what the deal with that 40 FPS mode is, it's really designed for anyone rocking HDMI 2.1 and a 120Hz screen. The target frame rate with that combination of hardware produces an exceptionally smooth experience. 10 extra frames doesn't sound like a lot, but when combined with the right screen setup, it really is a bit of a game changer. Having said that, I played at 60 FPS because the game already looked fantastic, and if I can get an extra 20 frames a second, then I'm going to do that. For a deep dive into all of this stuff, I'll refer you as always to Digital Foundry. They'll no doubt have excellent coverage of the 3 graphical options, including detailed comparisons. For me though, I will make clear that even when playing at 60 FPS performance mode, this game looks incredible. The scale of New York as it stretches out before you is overwhelming. The speed at which you can move through it all is dizzying. Never any slowdown or any loading screens. The amount of ground traffic is massively increased versus even Miles Morales or Spider-Man Remastered, and the city itself is sporting so much geometry, detail, and lighting. That's the other thing I should mention. Those 3 modes I listed, all of them have ray tracing. You can't turn ray tracing off in this game because, to quote Insomniac, there's no need to. Insomniac found a way to make a game look this good, run this well.
This game has ray-traced reflections, which primarily is meant to really improve how you perceive like the reflections in the skyscraper windows, but because it also happens a lot over water while you like traverse the like New York bridges and stuff like that, with screen space reflections you would get really noticeable visual artifacts, which obviously you don't with ray tracing, so they really needed to implement either ray tracing or just rely on normal maps or something like that, which obviously wouldn't be as cohesive. It does not have ray traced shadows, which Spider-Man 2018 and Miles Morales did in their PC ports, but ray traced shadows are like they really are not that necessary. Like screen space calculated shadows with good shadow maps, it's all good by modern standards still. It does not have ray trace based global illumination, which I think is the only like shortcoming probably, but it would simply not work on a PS5. Definitely not at 60 FPS, and it wouldn't even hit like probably 1440p at 30 FPS if you wanted both ray tracing reflections and global illuminations. Just look at how Metro Exodus runs in its RT version. So no, unfortunately, I think like this isn't there, but it's not needed because the way it just the environmental lighting works, it's already amazing. It might not be as perfectly accurate as RT-based global illumination, but that doesn't mean that it's bad without it by any means.
Stream assets this quickly and get it to a rock-solid 60 FPS with ray tracing enabled. I feel it is necessary for the government to step in and begin regulating Insomniac, because clearly these people are dangerous. The most powerful thing about Spider-Man's visuals...
Insomniac is like MacGyver. They can build a bomb out of a game code, basically. Yeah, it's amazing what they're achieving.
Aren't the textures, reflections, or frame rates, they're the framing. We don't often talk about the way that cutscenes or action sequences are directed in video games, the cinematography of them, but it's impossible to not notice how good Insomniac are at this stuff. From the massive, elaborate chase sequences across the city to just the finishes where Miles and Peter tag team some goon to put out his lights, the absolute...
And it all integrates so smoothly into each other. Really, nothing comes close.
Even more so because of the fact that it's like always playable. It's one thing to make some sick cutscene, but to allow the player to participate in that...
I think that goes back to like, you know, the Uncharted 4, like where you're like dragged behind the cars and stuff like that, and you can still wiggle around like that. I think this just continues that in such a convincing way.
As well as the white picket fenced residential burbs of Queens. This was definitely one of the most talked about features of Spider-Man 2.
It wasn't, by the way. I know what he's going to say. I think I saw like some Twitter thing cut out of his video. I'll actually have maybe a lot to say about
Sadly,
it.
this new real estate fails to achieve anything that the old real estate wasn't already doing. Brooklyn is basically...
It doesn't need to. It's a cohesive modern city with suburbs. Guys, it's... What do you want Spider-Man to do in like... Brooklyn versus Queens and stuff like that? What, does he fly in one region completely and not rely on web wings and swinging? Like, it's still Spider-Man. You cannot really change that.
The exact same as
we can just get more of him in a slightly different way.
It certainly looks different, but it doesn't feel different. Sure, it has houses instead of warehouses, but functionally, as Spider-Man, you're doing the same thing there that you would do anywhere else.
Like, it would work for like a game like Cyberpunk, where you can create like a portion of the city that is like designed to be walled off, you know, like Phantom Liberty does, where it's like maybe you have like more illegal drag racing happening and a lot more crime and stuff like that. That like works for a game like that, sort of. Though you could still achieve that with just like a slightly different, like an underground portion of the regular city. But to me, like making sure that like Queens plays differently than Brooklyn is such a weird thing to want. It's like there's only so much that the human mind will come up with, and having to find different like play options between Brooklyn and Queens and all that stuff, it's not realistic.
Though you are more reliant on your wingsuit here for the absence of skyscrapers.
Exactly.
This does feel like a big missed opportunity. As a form of virtual tourism, it's nice to take photos of stuff in Brooklyn or Queens and learn a little bit about them, but that's a pretty low bar to be aiming for. New sections of the...
No, there are emotional stories being told about what you can experience. You first like land in like Little Odessa, and learn like about the local fruit and vegetable market there and stuff like that. And as you go through the city in different environments, by the way, fast travel is locked behind like getting to learn about a borough, right? Which means that you have to understand more about it before you can actually fast travel, which I thought was like a really genius thing. I have not yet unlocked enough open world stuff to fast travel in any portion of the map. But I did take still a lot of pictures. I just took them all throughout the city. I did a lot of side missions. I did a lot of just like, you know, like your open world map stuff where like found stuff that was left behind by certain people, and I fought criminals and stuff like that. I chased cars and stuff like that. It all works really well. I know that like IGN gave this game like an 8 out of 10 because with one of the reasons being its outdated open world design. I completely disagree. I think it's a different open world design. I think it's an open world design that really suits of a fundamentally story-based title rather than something like Elden Ring or Breath of the Wild, where the story is really secondary to the open world, so you can actually afford to put a lot of surprises into the open world, while in this game, where most people will play it fundamentally through stories, be it main or side, and then get a little of extra stuff by checking off the boxes from the open world, you really cannot afford to hide too much good stuff in behind that open world stuff. You need to put it into the main or side story missions.
Map shouldn't just be an aesthetic expansion, it should ideally broaden gameplay opportunities, delivering stuff with...
Nope. That totally depends on the type of game. It's not like you're doing fundamentally that much different stuff in like Elden Ring between like all different portions of the map. You get like different enemies because that's the type of game it is, right? Because it's like a fantasy title where some part of it is like almost underground and some part is like really like old, and that's why you meet like different enemies. But it's not like you traverse through them differently. You still have like your horse and jumping and stuff like that. So no, I disagree. It's like we could be getting like maybe exclusive villains in one area, but we don't get exclusive villains anywhere. We just get all villains in every part of the city. So it's not like you're losing out on anything with this approach. I just don't get this point. It's New York, baby. It's not going to suddenly turn into something completely different.
haven't seen before or can't do.
Have you ever seen a movie where Spider-Man behaves completely differently between being in Brooklyn or Manhattan or Queens? No. The only difference is how high he swings.
Elsewhere, Brooklyn and Queens both fail to do that, and barring one later mission that sees you sneaking through the back streets of Queen at night to avoid Kraven's forces, you'll barely notice the impact that these new spaces...
But that's also not new story stuff. You can do like stealth missions pretty much everywhere. You can do them in a warehouse, or you can do that in like a suburb. It's a slightly different terrain. It doesn't fundamentally change your stealth gameplay. It's not like I'll spoil it in that regard. It's you move as Mary Jane through the suburbs, right? In a stealth mission. It's not like she suddenly turned into Metal Gear, into Solid Snake for that mission.
...have on the overall experience. When it comes to what there is to do around New York City, there's a hell of a lot, more so than ever before. But in terms of how new a lot of this feels, I think your mileage may vary. There are plenty of returning activities. You'll still have the photo shoots and the random crimes where you have to stop a burglary or catch criminals as they speed away in a getaway car. That stuff is sort of lifted and dropped from the first game into this one. Then there are the sort of remixes on a theme, like instead of beating up bad guys at a Fisk construction site, you're beating up Kraven's goons as they light bonfires on top of buildings. Instead of collecting backpacks hidden throughout the city, you're collecting spider bots, which are hidden throughout the city. This stuff has a new coat of paint, but it's basically the same stuff. Then there's...
Yeah, it's typical open world stuff.
The genuinely new stuff. One really fun side activity involves staying in the slipstream of one of these drone things.
Which is an evolution of Hunting the Dove story from... I don't know if it's Spider-Man 2018 or Miles Morales. I think it's 2018, but it's a better version of that.
And the way it weaves through New York and the speed at which you travel it's always a good time. There's another one where Miles needs to open up these stashes left behind by his uncle, and they involve some scanning of the environment and puzzle solving to get them open, etc. It's pretty basic, but it gets the job done.
Which is an evolution of Miles tracking the audio files from his uncle in Spider-Man Miles Morales.
So there's definitely some new stuff here. In fact, I'd say more than half...
Or audio samples from the real-world environment, I should say, and turning them into files.
What you're doing in New York is new or new-ish, but all of it feels like it fits within an open-world framework that hasn't evolved from the last game. It's still an assortment of very discrete, singular, disconnected activities peppered throughout the game.
Yeah, because as Spider-Man, you have a lot of stuff to do in the city that will not be highly connected. You do stuff in one borough and another, you help one set of people and then another. I try to play this game as Spider-Man in that regard, where I actually take up an egregious amount of side stuff as I traverse the environment, and I'm like, oh, there's a crime like 200 meters left of me. Man, I now have to divert there because Spider-Man wouldn't let those people die. So I cannot let those people die. But then I did it while I was Black Suits Peter. Well, I know that Peter would help people while in the symbiote suit as well, but it felt more appropriate to be like, well, I'm not helping them like in a simple car chase or anything. I'm just helping those who might die. I'm too important in my black suit to do that. That felt good.
You do them to get some upgrade currencies. You do a lot of them to get the platinum trophy. For many, that's fine, and it must be said that completing the platinum trophy here is, as with the last game, a really pleasant experience.
Spider-Man 2018 and Miles Morales are 2 of the 5 games that I have platinum, so you know that I don't dislike those open world activities.
But I've spoken to other reviewers who have, and you can platinum Spider-Man 2 in around about 30 hours or so without needing to do any bullshit.
Yeah, probably
like
I'm around 15 hours in if I invest another 15 hours just for open world stuff once I'm done with the story after 2 hours or so. I assume I will be done in 2 hours.
It's that again here in Spider-Man 2, and if that's what you wanted, then great. But if you were hoping that formula might evolve somewhat, then I think you're going to be a little bit disappointed. To be clear, I liked it, I really did, but I definitely found myself engaging with it less this time around because I felt as though I'd already experienced it.
Yeah, I would also say there is part of that where it comes down to as a game reviewer, you just want to be surprised a lot and stuff like that, because if you experience monotony, and don't get me wrong, there is absolutely monotony in some of the stuff. Something monotonous can still be fun, right? It just means that well, I guess not monotony, but something repetitive, right? Something repetitive can still be fun. But if you're investing a lot of time into one game and then another and stuff like that, you want to be surprised as much as possible. So you might be a little like almost artificially angry at that stuff that you would never really consider a problem if you were actually taking like your proper time to play the game.
Was on offer. The biggest thing that transforms the feeling of being out in and above New York City is the wingsuit, and I'm sure I'm going to get in a lot of trouble for this take, but I think the way it's been implemented here isn't great, and I think Spider-Man 2 loses some of its identity owing to how powerful and convenient these wings are. So to be clear, you get them basically right away, like the first mission, and it lets you glide basically endlessly, and you can use them whenever and wherever you like. No restrictions, no limitations. It's really fun, especially at first. You're dive bombing to pick up speed, weaving in between buildings, pulling up to get your height back and surveying the city below you. It's totally awesome. It has a nice feel to it as well. Like you can feel the wind resistance and you feel the laws of aerodynamics kicking in as you try to make turns that are too ambitious. It's genuinely super good. In fact, it's too good because it is so fast and so convenient and often so necessary that it quickly becomes your default means of getting around New York.
But that's the point. It's not necessary. You could still use swinging, which I believe is a little faster than in the original game, and it's not like the environment is suddenly elongated. It's still New York City. You just use it because it's more fun. And I have seen some people complain about like once you unlock fast travel, you can transport yourself to any point in the city. First of all, you obviously need to do like your side activities to even unlock that to begin with. But the other point is, yes, it's an option. If you cannot contain yourself from doing it, that means you're probably having fun and liking the convenience. It's not Elden Ring. Yes, sure, there is part of it where like the way is the destination or however you want to put it. But overall, sometimes you just want to get to the main site or a main mission, and sometimes you want either super fast web wings or even fast travel. artificial. If you still want to explore the main map, some people only do that after they're done with the main missions, and I often do that. So I just hate it when people complain about it. I love that I don't have to open up the map as often as I had in Spider-Man 2018. Some people will claim that's artificial because, well, how could you see everything? It's like no heads-up display is that good or something like that. It's like, no, just let me have fun and play the actual game instead of focusing just on, like, if the traversal is good, believe me, I will use the traversal. I have not gone out of my way to unlock fast travel because I like how Spidey feels in swinging, in web gliding, but this idea that it's poorly implemented because it's super convenient, that's like a reviewer's perspective, which is like, oh, if I really scientifically detect like all the potential downsides here, which is people might potentially skip out some stuff because they're so fast, let people have options.
And it's like, I don't know about that, man. Like, I'm playing a Spider-Man game, not a Superman game. Web swing is kind of the point, and I found myself doing a lot less of it this time around. So the obvious response is, well, what's the problem? If you don't like it, don't use it. And that's actually true, and that's actually what I started forcing myself to do after a while, stop using it, because I felt like I was missing out on the Spider-Man experience by defaulting to the wingsuit as often as I was able to. And so the obvious follow-up to that response is, well, if you don't have to use it and you can still web swing, then what the fuck are you complaining about? And the answer is, I don't know. It just doesn't feel quite right, to be honest with you.
Okay,
I felt
that's just a personal thing he has. That's fair, I'll give it.
Any particular mission sequences were less interesting for how much I could rely on it. There are wind tunnels scattered throughout New York, and had the wingsuit been limited to only those tunnels, then I think that would have been perfect. If the wings were a way to get across town fast.
The wingsuit is actually pretty slow without it. Yes, it's still faster than web and then swinging, but it will not make a substantial difference. With those wind tunnels, it ends up making a significant difference. But those are few and far between in the actual city. The most reliable way where you find them is like around the bridges, so that you get like really fast traversal there and stuff like that.
Or across a body of water, then yeah, sure. But always available, always the fastest and most convenient means of transportation for Spider-Man. I do think that something was lost there. And if there does end up being a Spider-Man 3, I wouldn't mind seeing Spidey's wings being clipped just a little. When it comes to
sorry, I checked if my stream was working fine because I saw some stutter.
Stealthing, and science. Let's do the science first. The science stuff in the first game, not great. Some really boring, drawn-out missions that felt like the game screeched to a halt every time we were forced to do them. We didn't mind doing them, though, because I think we were all on board with what Insomniac were going for here. They were trying to show that Peter Parker isn't just a superhero, he's also a scientist, and they wanted to communicate that part of his personality and his story through actual gameplay. Insomniac retained that intention here in Spider-Man 2, and I think they do a much better job with the sorts of activities that you're doing in order to showcase the different sides of both Peter and Miles.
Okay, that's absolutely true. They have like integrated them into certain missions where it actually like requires you to maybe isolate a certain element, or as you can see here, do some light puzzle solving. I think it's done really well. I think it's less intrusive. I think it's more creative than in the first game. And if you really just want to like go out of your way to solve every kind of science puzzle that Insomniac has to offer, try to go for the platinum. There is like one specific kind of mission where you'll have to do that. That's fine.
There is still puzzle solving science stuff. Some of it is in the main missions, but a lot of it's been pushed to the side missions. It's faster to get through and less compulsory than it was the first time around. So Insomniac have found a better balance here. There's also some genuinely exciting science stuff, like when Peter needs to go into a particle accelerator to repair it while it's turned on, or this weird minigame where you have to shoot bees using a shooting bee drone, and apparently this trains the drone to spot the bad bees or something. Really, it's just an excuse to shoot shit for a few seconds. It definitely works. It's fun.
We're training to detect and attack bee wolves,
AKA bee killer wasps.
and you're helping with the machine learning algorithm.
For Miles, Insomniac did a great job of showcasing his life as a high school student, namely by asking him to help out on campus with various odds and ends. One mission sees a rival school kidnap the school mascot, and so Miles has to go and solve a bunch of puzzles to find and rescue it before slinging it over his shoulder and web schlepping back to campus. Sure, he's in the suit rather than being straight up Miles, but he's on campus helping out fellow students with their problems, and it's nice.
Yeah, I've played the mission where he helped out a guy make like a homecoming date proposal to his, I want to say lover, but basically to a boy he loves. That was really sweet and tender. There was like some light scientific puzzle stuff where you like had to connect some stuff for the electricity to work correctly for the display where he was showing that. That was really cool. I like this kind of missions.
Any luck? On my way back. And I'm bringing a fluffy friend.
The MJ stealthing stuff is back.
Is way better than the first game and actually fun and really well integrated.
And it's a lot better, though it definitely requires a lot more suspension of disbelief.
Yes,
MJ
it
was
does.
pretty helpless in the first game, so the stealth sections were very limited in what she could do, other than just, don't get seen. Now MJ has a stun gun, and she would just run around KOing anybody in her path. As a result, she finds herself in some very, very dangerous situations and locations, far more so than like an after-hours art gallery, for example. But yeah, it is a little funny to see just how lethal MJ is against all manner of foes.
They explained it because she apparently trained with Silver Sable in Sakaria. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. That's where the stealth gun comes from, and that's where her training comes from. Granted, I don't know how long exactly she stayed there and how much time exactly she spent on training. She's really taking out goons that are trained by Craven, so that's pretty unrealistic, but it's fun.
Where are you, Doc?
It must be said that MJ isn't the only one getting her stealth on. Miles and Peter are both able to do takedowns from above in certain mission settings, and these are often some of the most satisfying rooms to clear, since the stealth framework is surprisingly functional, aided by the inclusion of a new zipline feature that allows you to build
those
a
are
little
really
spider
fun.
web above your foes' heads. But yeah,
I have to say, I like SkillUp's
countdown.
reviews.
And
I just,
Spider-Man 2 delivers
he
a
sometimes will
surprising amount of
nitpick where I
improvement,
just
more
don't
than
think
enough
I
to spice
agree.
things up, in fact. There's been a reworking of the approach to abilities and gadgets. Miles and Peter each have moves unique to them, which are mapped to the left trigger, and they also share a number of Spidey gadgets that are mapped to the right trigger.
Yeah.
Hold one of those down and press a corresponding face button to execute your move of choice, and there are a number of different options you can equip from the menu. They're all on very short cooldown timers that only become shorter as the game goes on and the better you play, and they all offer a measure of strategic depth owing to their utility. One web gadget will knock a group of enemies into the air.
Yeah, and some enemies are like more susceptible to certain gadgets, some specifically to electricity, so there's a lot of good stuff here.
And that'll work. But if you really take the time,
It's not an RPG by any means, but it's actually really fun. Smarter action combat.
Because I definitely found Spider-Man 2 to be a lot more challenging than the first two games.
It is. I die somewhat regularly in the normal mode when I'm really tired and it's 3 in the morning. I don't die when I'm not tired, but since I do like to play the first playthrough and like the first weekend, I'm tired a lot while playing.
Maintain aggressive momentum during combat, something you'll appreciate more and more as new moves get unlocked and as your own mastery grows. A special treat are the tag team takedowns. Often Peter and Miles will be fighting together or with someone
And sometimes
else.
they
When
will
that
like
happens,
find
Peter will take down
themselves
one or two really
coincidentally in the
impressive
city. They'll
finisher.
find each other and then they will help each other. And they're definitely killing a lot of people.
Previously, they were kind of about doing certain things to trigger attack windows, and you do that X number of times to finish off the boss. Here in Spider-Man 2, bosses now have health bars. In fact, they have a lot of them. The big marquee bosses will have up to 4 health bars that need to be chipped away at over time, each one marking a new phase of the fight and offering a checkpoint when you complete it. Coupled with the increased difficulty of the game, I definitely found myself really appreciating these boss battles a lot more. I really had to knuckle down
they're
and
way
learn it.
more
I couldn't just
intricate.
master one mechanic and repeat it 3 times to win. I had to master my whole combat arsenal and bring it to bear over a sustained period, because these fights can go for a while. Definitely a notable step up versus the previous game. There aren't many of these boss encounters, but when they happen, they absolutely deliver. Where the narrative and open world side of Spider-Man 2 can often feel familiar, I really do think Insomniac found a new level here with mission and combat design. The better approach to science and stealth makes for better mission pacing, while the revised combat controls, the new moves, the parry, the tag team takedowns, and the boss battles all feel like meaningful improvements.
For that
It's not
stuff,
like
I
you're
like
playing a whole new
SkillUp's
game, don't get me
reviews. There's
wrong.
nothing I
There's
can
enough
add
here to make
here,
combat
right?
feel
I don't want to
notably
do
better
the
than previous
XQC
outings,
like
but
watching
that's
while
gonna be
doing
more than enough to keep you feeling
interesting
excited each
stuff,
time
but
you
it's
put your eyes
100%
into
correct
the
what he's currently saying. I will pause him and correct him when he's doing something wrong. Like, he still hasn't commented on what relationships he thinks have been done wrong. Maybe he really meant a lot of stuff around Craven?
So like I said at the top, I do think Spider-Man 2 is a better video game than the previous two Spider-Man games. It's unquestionably better looking, it runs better, it has more space to explore, 2 playable Spider-Men, better mission and boss design, better combat, better basketball. The first game had 0 basketball, so this is a no-brainer right here. But yeah, just because something is better in each of its components doesn't mean that the sum of those parts is greater. For me personally, I think this is a remarkably well-made game that is a must-purchase for anyone with a PS5 or eventually a PC, but it just didn't hit as hard for me the second time around. I do think the inclusion of Queens and Brooklyn was a bit of a missed opportunity.
I don't like saying the second time around. It's not the same game.
Suit chipped away at that Spider-Man fantasy. I think the open world stuff continues to be diverse.
I've already
and
commented
enjoyable,
on
but
those
it felt quite
nitpicks.
familiar, and I wonder how this random assortment of activities could be combined to feel more satisfying and meaningful to complete, other than just for upgrade components and a platinum trophy. Finally, and I think most importantly, I definitely felt as though this story had its ups and downs in a way that I didn't feel about the previous game. That's totally
Really?
subjective. Everyone's going to have their own view on that stuff, but as someone who
I think this story works
and
better
seen
than
stories told
2018.
and retold countless times, I definitely feel ready for some new stories, or at the very least, a deeper inversion of those existing stories. Spider-Man 2 doesn't do that. It's pretty safe in most aspects, always enjoyable, always well told, but yeah, safe, at a time when I think Spidey could do with a little shaking up on the narrative front. Like every other review, all of that is just my subjective opinion.
Yeah,
Surely
I'll
many
not
people
criticize
will
that too
disagree.
much.
It
It's
was
not
an
like he's saying it's bad, it's just that he wanted
This is a
something
fantastic
more
video.
surprising.
Minor
And
qualms
he's
one way or
calling
the
it
other don't change
fantastic.
how well made this is, how much is on offer, how dazzling its spectacle regularly is, how brilliant its combat continues to be, the list goes on. Spider-Man 2 may just be more Spider-Man, but when the bar that Insomniac hits is this impossibly high, more of that can never be a bad thing.
Fair.
So for a while now, I've
I'll just do a floating head thing before we finish. I think I've talked about most of the things I wanted to talk about today in general, but I also talked a lot about Spider-Man, and definitely more and longer than I expected. I guess my voice had a lot more energy than I expected. I would give this game currently a 9.5 out of 10. I would give take away half a point for some of like the Craven not being super connected stuff. For me, the pacing works better than in 2018. Again, the science stuff, and I think some of the necessarily diversions in between with like Feast and like sure it's set up and May, but it wasn't. It really was disconnected from gameplay. I think it is about as well paced as Miles Morales, but with higher like peaks in terms of storytelling. I think the gameplay is basically immaculate. It just gets better and better. I think it learned a lot from Miles Morales in terms of like fluid motions, in terms of like really powerful stuff, where in the original game you really had like a lot of fluidity, but it was mostly like punch, gadget. Here it's like punch, different punch, strategic, like turn half into the symbiote, attack, gadget, and then you can do some variation between if you're playing as Peter or as Miles. So 100% recommendation for me. I think SkillUp is mostly fair. I think I've addressed pretty well the points where I disagreed with him with, but it's not like I will attack him the way I attacked him for his Final Fantasy 16 review, where I disagreed with him entirely on his takes and like how it needs to be an RPG basically, even though the developers have told us over and over again it's not a traditional RPG in any way, shape or form. We've also covered obviously a lot of Apple ground, and in a lot of OnePlus ground by reacting to the MKBHD review. I won't hold you up any further. I will just recommend you guys do the usual YouTube jazz, as I call it. Subscribe, like, share. If you want to support this channel directly, you can find my Patreon link in the description of this channel. You can also send, if you're in future live streams, and if you're in the live chat, you can send super chats or super stickers, or once the videos have already been processed on YouTube, you can send the super thanks. Again, only do so if you have the financial means, but it's really greatly appreciated. And of course, hit the notification bell so you actually know when I'm going live and you don't miss it. Thank you guys so much for the amazing growth this channel has experienced in the last 2-3 weeks. We are now at over 8,000 subscribers. I hardly cannot believe that. I really wanted to give at least something back to you by still trying to stream today. It ended up being a 3-hour stream. Definitely didn't expect that to happen. So I hope you enjoyed it. You definitely gave me the strength to do this. See you guys next time. Please let me know what you would like to see me comment on next. But maybe tomorrow we'll get some interesting stuff from Marc Gurman, and then I'll have something. But if not, then definitely early next week expect something for whatever kind of rumors we might be getting, and then maybe later on in a week or two I might do a full-on review of Spider-Man 2 because I really am enjoying it, and I would love to talk about it with spoilers. But with all that being said, thank you guys so much. This is Marc Tech tuning out.